The moment Lena Caruso whispered that Sicilian curse under her breath, she didn't know the man who heard it could end her life with a phone call. Dominic Falcone, heir to New York's most dangerous empire, sat 3 feet away, dressed in tailored perfection while she served wine with trembling hands and a splitting headache from her second job. She thought he didn't speak the old language. She was wrong. When his dark eyes locked onto hers and that devastating smile curved his lips, Lena knew she'd just insulted the one man in the city nobody dared to cross. If you want to see how a tired woman's sharp tongue changes everything, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Bellinore flickered like dying fireflies, casting shadows across tables where tourists laughed too loudly, and couples leaned into candlelight that did nothing to hide the restaurant's peeling paint. Lena Caruso moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind cataloged the 17 things she still needed to do before sunrise. 3 more tables. 4 hours of translation work waiting at home. 6 hours until her morning shift at the legal office started. Sleep somewhere in between if she was lucky. Her feet screamed inside the cheap heels she'd worn for 11 hours straight, the kind of pain that started as a whisper and built into a roar, the kind that made you question every choice that led you to this moment. Standing in a restaurant that smelled like garlic and broken dreams, serving overpriced pasta to people who didn't notice you existed. Signorina. The voice cut through the dinner noise like a knife through silk. Lena turned, forcing her professional smile into place even as exhaustion pulled at every muscle. Yes, how can I... The words died in her throat. The man at table 7 shouldn't have existed outside of Renaissance paintings or fever dreams. Dark hair swept back from a face carved with dangerous precision, sharp jawline, aristocratic nose, and eyes so dark they looked black in the restaurant's dim lighting. His suit probably cost more than her annual rent. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a midnight blue tie that somehow made the whole package even more devastating. But it wasn't his looks that made the air leave her lungs. It was the way the entire restaurant seemed to orbit around him, the subtle shift in the room's energy, like everyone had suddenly become aware of a predator in their midst, even if they couldn't name why their instincts screamed danger. 2 men flanked him at the table, both built like walls in expensive suits, both watching the room with eyes that never stopped moving. Security. The kind that didn't stop muggers, the kind that created them. The Barolo. His voice matched everything else about him, smooth, cultured, with an edge that suggested violence wrapped in velvet. Your sommelier recommended it. Lena's brain kicked back into gear. Right, wine. She could do wine. She'd been doing wine for 3 years while her translation degree gathered dust and her dreams of working at the UN turned into punchlines she told herself at 3 in the morning. An excellent choice. She reached for the bottle with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. It's one of our finest... You don't believe that. Her hand froze on the bottle. Excuse me? Those dark eyes studied her with uncomfortable intensity, like he could see straight through her service industry smile into the exhausted, frustrated woman beneath. The Barolo. You think it's overpriced mediocrity, masquerading as quality. I can see it in your face. Heat crept up Lena's neck. In 3 years of waiting tables, nobody had ever called her out like that. Nobody looked close enough to see past the mask. I think, she said carefully, that taste is subjective, and our Barolo has excellent ratings, which mean nothing. He leaned back in his chair, somehow making the simple movement look like a power play. Ratings are purchased, quality is experienced. So tell me, Signorina, what would you actually recommend? Lena glanced at the bottle in her hand, then at the man who just casually dismissed a $300 wine like it was grocery store trash. Her manager would kill her, the tip would disappear. She should smile, pour the damn Barolo, and move on with her life. Instead, she heard herself say, the Chianti Classico from table 4. It's a third of the price, twice the authenticity, and actually tastes like something your grandmother would have served in Sicily instead of something designed to impress business partners you're trying to fleece. Silence crashed over table 7. The two security men stopped their surveillance sweep to stare at her. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot clattered, and the dangerous man in the perfect suit did something Lena didn't expect. He laughed, not a polite chuckle or a patronizing dismissal, a real laugh that transformed his face from intimidating to devastating, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes that somehow made him more dangerous, not less. "Bring the Chianti," he said, still smiling, "and a glass for yourself. I'm working. I'm aware. Bring it anyway." It wasn't a request. Lena had spent enough time in New York to recognize the tone of a man who expected obedience simply because he'd never been denied. The kind of man who thought money and power meant he could rewrite the rules for everyone around him. She should have walked away, should have brought the wine and nothing else, pocketed whatever tip he left, and forgotten this entire interaction. Instead, she met his eyes directly and said, "No." The temperature at table 7 dropped 10 degrees. One of the security men shifted forward, but the dangerous man held up a hand without breaking eye contact with Lena. "No? I have 4 other tables, a double shift, and a translation project due at midnight. So no, I won't be drinking wine with a stranger who thinks his money means I should abandon my job to keep him company." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Somewhere in her exhausted brain, a voice screamed that she'd just committed career suicide, or possibly actual suicide, given the way those security men looked ready to make her disappear. But she was so tired. Tired of smiling through condescension, tired of being invisible, tired of men who thought waitresses existed as decoration instead of human beings with their own lives and problems and dreams that had nothing to do with serving them. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, the man studied her with those unsettling dark eyes. Then he nodded slowly, like she'd passed some test she didn't know she was taking. "Chianti Classico," he said quietly. 2 glasses. One for me, one for my colleague here." He gestured to the security man on his left. "I apologize for the presumption, signorina. You're right to refuse." Lena blinked. In her experience, men like this didn't apologize. They doubled down, complained to management, or left reviews that got people fired. "I'll bring the wine," she managed. "And your name?" "Why?" That dangerous smile returned. "Because I'd like to know who just told me no with more grace than most men show when they say yes." She shouldn't answer. Should maintain the professional distance between server and customer, the barrier that kept her safe from the kind of attention this man represented. "Lena," she heard herself say. "Lena Caruso." Dominic Falcone. He extended his hand across the table. The name hit her like a fist to the gut. Falcone. She'd lived in New York long enough to know that name, to hear it whispered in the same breath as words like family and territory and don't ask questions if you want to keep breathing. Her hand moved to shake his anyway, some autopilot politeness overriding her screaming survival instincts. His grip was warm, firm, and sent electricity shooting up her arm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles before releasing her. "The wine," she said, pulling her hand back faster than professionally appropriate. "I'll bring the wine." She fled to the bar before he could respond, her pulse racing and her hand shaking as she reached for the Chianti. Behind the bar, Marco gave her a questioning look. "Table 7 wants the Chianti Classico instead of the Barolo," she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. "Falcone's table?" Marco's eyes widened. "Lena, what did you He asked my opinion. I gave it." She poured 2 glasses with hands that had finally stopped trembling. "It's fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing about Dominic Falcone was fine. Men like him existed in a different world than hers, a world of power and violence and rules that bent around them instead of the other way around. When she returned to table 7, Dominic took the wine glass with another one of those unsettling smiles. "Thank you, Lena Caruso." The way he said her name made it sound like a secret, like he was already filing it away somewhere dangerous. She should have walked away then, should have finished her shift and forgotten the whole encounter. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Will there be anything else, Mr. Falcone?" "Dominic," he corrected. "And yes, Dinner recommendations, something authentic that tourists wouldn't order. Against every screaming instinct, Lena found herself describing the off-menu dishes her grandmother used to make, the ones the chef prepared for family and friends. Dominic listened like she was sharing state secrets instead of pasta recipes, his attention so focused it felt physical. When she finally escaped back to her other tables, she could feel his eyes following her across the room. Not leering, she knew what that felt like. This was different. Assessing, considering, like she was a puzzle he'd decided to solve. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of orders and small talk and the constant awareness of table 7 in her peripheral vision. Dominic stayed for 2 hours, working through the dishes she'd recommended with the same focused intensity he'd given their conversation. The security men ate in silence, their eyes never stopping their surveillance sweep of the restaurant. When Lena finally brought the check, she found a business card tucked inside the leather folder along with enough cash to cover the bill 3 times over. "The extra is not a tip," Dominic said quietly, standing as she approached. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized, his presence somehow filling more space than his body should occupy. "It's payment for your honesty. That kind of authenticity is rare." Lena looked at the money, more than she made in a week, and felt something twist in her chest. Pride warred with practicality, dignity fought with the very real weight of her student loans. "I can't accept this." "You can." His voice gentled slightly. "And you will, because you're exhausted and overworked and that money means something different to you than it does to me. There's no shame in accepting help, Lena." The way he said it, not patronizing, not pitying, just matter of fact, made it somehow harder to refuse. She took the money. "The business card," Dominic continued, "is in case you ever want work that uses your actual degree instead of wasting your brilliance on tourists who wouldn't know authentic Italian if it bit them." Before she could respond, he was moving toward the exit, his security detail falling into formation around him like planets orbiting a sun. The restaurant seemed to exhale as he left, the normal noise and chaos rushing back to fill the vacuum his presence had created. Lena stood frozen, holding a business card that probably represented a dozen different kinds of danger, and enough money to pay her rent. "Testa di cazzo," she muttered under her breath. Dickhead. Rich, presumptuous, dangerous dickhead who thought he could just... "I heard that." She spun around to find Dominic standing in the doorway, that devastating smile playing across his lips. The security men had stopped, waiting with the patience of people paid to wait. "You speak Sicilian?" Lena's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "My grandmother made sure of it." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with those dark eyes that saw too much. "You know, most people who work in customer service save the insults until after the customer leaves." Heat flooded Lena's face. "I apologize, I shouldn't have..." "Don't." He took a step back into the restaurant, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than her car. "I spent 2 hours watching you smile through condescension and dismissal from people who don't deserve your time. That little flash of temper? That was the first real thing you've shown all night, besides the wine recommendation, of course." "I really am sorry. I'm not." His smile widened fractionally. "Call me Lena Caruso. When you're ready to stop wasting your talent on people who can't appreciate it." Then he was gone, disappearing into a black car that probably cost more than most people's houses, leaving Lena standing in the middle of Bella Notte with a business card burning a hole in her pocket and the unsettling certainty that her life had just taken a turn she couldn't predict. She made it through the rest of her shift on autopilot, deflecting Marco's questions and avoiding her manager's knowing looks. When she finally clocked out at midnight, her feet were screaming and her head was pounding, and she still had 4 hours of translation work waiting at home. The business card sat on her kitchen table while she worked, translating legal documents from Italian to English with the kind of precision that had earned her a degree she couldn't afford to use. Every time her eyes drifted to Dominic's name embossed in elegant script, she forced them back to her computer screen. She didn't need whatever he was offering, didn't need the complications that came with men like him, men who lived in a world where rules bent and violence simmered beneath expensive suits and cultured manners. At 4 a.m, exhaustion finally dragged her into bed. She dreamed of dark eyes and dangerous smiles and the way her name had sounded in Dominic's voice, like a promise wrapped in a threat. 3 days passed before Dominic Falcone walked back into Bellinode. Lena spotted him the moment he entered, her body responding before her brain caught up, pulse quickening, breath shortening, every nerve suddenly alive in a way that 3 consecutive double shifts should have made impossible. He looked different in daylight streaming through the restaurant's windows. Less like a Renaissance painting and more like something modern and dangerous, his dark suit exchanged for charcoal slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, exposing forearms that suggested he didn't get that build from sitting behind a desk. No security detail this time. Just Dominic, moving through the lunch crowd with the same unconscious authority that parted people without him saying a word. He sat at the same table. 7. Like he'd reserved it permanently in the 3 days since their last encounter. Lena's hands tightened on the water pitcher she'd been refilling. She could ask Marco to cover the table. Should ask Marco, because nothing good could come from another conversation with a man whose business card she'd stared at for 3 nights running without finding the courage to call. She walked over anyway. Mr. Falcone. Professional, distant, safe. What can I get you today? Dominic, he corrected, the same way he had 3 nights ago. And I'm not here for lunch. The restaurant serves lunch. If you're not here for lunch, I'm here for you. The words hung between them, blunt and unapologetic. Around them, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm, conversations and clinking silverware and the hiss of the espresso machine. But Lena felt like they'd been dropped into a pocket of silence where only truth existed. I don't know what you think. I think you haven't called. Dominic leaned back in his chair, somehow making the casual posture look elegant. I think you've looked at my card approximately 20 times and talked yourself out of it each time. And I think you're too intelligent to let pride or fear keep you waiting tables when you could be doing something that actually uses your skills. Lena set the water pitcher down carefully, buying herself time to process the presumption dripping from every word. You don't know anything about me. I know you translate legal documents until 4 in the morning and show up here 6 hours later with coffee stains on your sleeve and vocabulary most Americans don't have. I know you're brilliant and overworked and wasting yourself on people who think Olive Garden is authentic Italian cuisine. How do you... She stopped, realization hitting like cold water. You had me investigated. I had you researched. He said it like there was a difference. I'm offering you a job, Lena. I do my due diligence. Anger sparked hot and bright in her chest, burning through the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. You had no right. You're correct. I apologize. The words came quickly, with what seemed like genuine remorse. That was invasive and inappropriate. I should have simply asked you directly instead of taking shortcuts. The apology, again, knocked her off balance. Men like Dominic Falcone didn't apologize, didn't admit fault, didn't look at her with eyes that somehow managed to convey both authority and something that looked almost like respect. What job? The question escaped before she could stop it. Dominic's expression shifted, business sliding over whatever personal interest had been there before. I'm opening a cultural center in Little Italy, authentic Italian art, history, language preservation. It's a passion project, my grandmother's dream before she passed. I need a translator and cultural consultant who actually understands the material instead of running everything through software that can't tell the difference between Tuscan and Sicilian dialects. Lena stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who commanded rooms with violence simmering beneath his surface with someone who cared about preserving Italian cultural heritage. Why me? Because in 5 minutes of conversation, you showed me more authentic knowledge than 3 so-called experts I interviewed. Because you understand the difference between performative Italianness and the real thing. And because... He paused, something flickering across his face too quickly to name. Because I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Like calling you a dickhead in Sicilian? That dangerous smile returned. Exactly like that. Lena's mind raced through possibilities and complications. A legitimate job using her actual degree. The kind of work she'd dreamed about when she'd poured thousands of dollars and countless hours into her education. Money that would mean she could quit one, maybe both, of her current soul-crushing positions. But Dominic Falcone wasn't offering charity. Men like him didn't do anything without angles and agendas and prices that didn't appear on contracts. What's the catch? 6-month contract, 40 hours a week, salary that's triple what you're making now between both jobs. Benefits, including health insurance that actually covers things. He named a figure that made her breath catch. It was too much, too good, too convenient. And what do you want in return? Something in Dominic's expression shuddered, his features rearranging themselves into careful neutrality. I want accurate translations, cultural consultation that respects the source material, and someone who'll tell me the truth instead of what they think I want to hear. Nothing else? Understanding flickered in those dark eyes. I'm offering you a job, Lena, not asking you to compromise yourself in any way beyond working hard and being honest. If you're worried about, I'm not worried. The lie came automatically. I'm cautious. There's a difference. Good. He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket and set it on the table between them. Contract. Read it. Have a lawyer review it if you want. I'll pay the fees. If you're interested, call me. If not, keep the card for kindling and forget we had this conversation. He stood, and Lena realized she didn't want him to leave. Didn't want to go back to her normal, exhausting existence where the most interesting thing that happened was tourists complaining about authentic Italian food tasting different than the Americanized versions they expected. Why are you really doing this? The question came out quieter than she intended. Dominic paused, something raw and real crossing his face before the careful mask returned. My grandmother raised me. She came to America with nothing, worked herself to the bone, and died surrounded by people who'd forgotten where they came from. This center is her legacy. I need it to be perfect. I need it to be real. And I think you're the person who can help me build that. Truth. Lena heard it in every word, saw it in the way his shoulders carried weight she couldn't name. I'll read the contract. That's all I'm asking. He moved toward the exit, then stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, you were right about the Barolo. I had my wine expert verify. Overpriced mediocrity masquerading as quality, just like you said. Then he was gone, leaving Lena holding an envelope that felt like it contained more than just a contract, like it held a doorway to a different life, one where she used her brain instead of her ability to smile through condescension. She made it through the rest of her shift in a daze, the envelope burning against her side where she'd tucked it into her apron. When she got home that night, she spread the contract across her kitchen table and read every word twice. It was exactly what Dominic had promised. Salary, benefits, clearly defined responsibilities. No hidden clauses, no demands for anything beyond professional competence. Her lawyer friend reviewed it the next day and found nothing suspicious beyond the fact that the pay was exceptionally generous. Who is this guy? Sarah had asked, squinting at Dominic's signature. And is he hiring anyone else? Because I'd translate Latin for this kind of money. Lena had deflected, made excuses, and spent another 2 days staring at the contract while her tired mind and her practical heart waged war. On the third day, she called the number on Dominic's business card. He answered on the first ring. Lena. Not a question. Like he'd been waiting for her call, like he'd known she'd eventually make it. I have conditions, she said, bypassing greetings and small talk. I'm listening. 6-month contract, like you said, but with an exit clause if either party wants out with 2 weeks' notice. I want my own office space, not a cubicle in some open floor plan, and I want final approval on any translations that go public with my name attached. Silence on the other end. Then, done. Anything else? Why did you really come back to the restaurant? The question had been haunting her for 3 days. Why not just call? Why not send someone else to deliver the contract? Why show up in person when he could have handled everything at a comfortable distance? Because I wanted to see if you were as sharp when you weren't exhausted and running on fumes. His voice carried something she couldn't name. And because I told you I'd be honest, so here's the truth. I like talking to you. I liked the way you looked at me like I was just another customer instead of what I am. I liked that you told me no. And I thought you deserved to hear this offer directly instead of through intermediaries and business cards. Lena's hand tightened on her phone. What you are. We'll get to that eventually. Right now, I'm offering you a job doing work you're qualified for. Everything else is noise until you decide if you trust me enough to take it. Trust. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. I'll take the job, Lena heard herself say. But Mr. Falcone, Dominic, I'm doing this for the work, for your grandmother's legacy, not for anything else. Understood. His voice carried approval. Start Monday. I'll have my assistant send you the address and building access information. Welcome aboard, Lena Caruso. He ended the call before she could respond, leaving her standing in her tiny apartment with her phone pressed to her ear and the feeling that she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. Probably both. She gave her notice at both jobs that afternoon, enduring her manager's disappointment at Bellanotte and her supervisor's surprise at the legal office. The next 4 days crawled by with agonizing slowness, every hour bringing fresh doubts about what she'd agreed to. Saturday night, she stood in front of her closet trying to figure out what qualified as appropriate professional attire for working with a man whose casual clothes probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Sunday, she barely slept. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the kind of cold that seeped into bones. Lena stood outside the address Dominic's assistant had sent, a renovated brownstone in Little Italy that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime, and tried to remember how to breathe. The door opened before she could knock. Dominic stood there in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look both more approachable and more dangerous. You came. I said I would. People say a lot of things. He stepped back, gesturing her inside. Doesn't mean they follow through. The interior took her breath away. Exposed brick, soaring ceilings, original hardwood floors polished to a soft gleam. But it was the walls that caught her attention, covered in photographs of old Italy, Sicily, families in traditional dress, landscapes that looked like they'd been pulled from dreams. Your grandmother? She asked, moving toward a photo of a young woman with fierce eyes and a defiant smile. Rosa Falcone. Dominic's voice softened. She crossed the Atlantic alone at 17 with $50 and a suitcase full of family recipes. Built a life, raised a family, and never let anyone make her forget where she came from. Lena studied the photograph, seeing echoes of Dominic in that young woman's features, the same sharp intelligence, the same refusal to apologize for taking up space. This center is for her, Dominic continued, to preserve what she fought to keep alive. Language, culture, history, all the things that get lost when people forget their roots. It's beautiful. Lena turned to face him. The vision, I mean. Not just the building. Something in his expression shifted, warming in a way that made her pulse quicken. Come on, I'll show you your office. He led her through rooms in various states of renovation, exhibit spaces being designed, a language classroom taking shape, a kitchen where traditional cooking classes would happen, and at the end of a long hallway, a corner office with windows overlooking a small garden. This is mine? Lena breathed. All yours. Computer, software, reference library. My assistant will get you whatever else you need. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, watching her take in the space. I meant what I said about wanting this to be perfect. That means I need you comfortable and equipped to do your best work. Lena set her bag down carefully on the desk. Real wood, solid and beautiful. Her own office. Her own space. The kind of professional respect she'd dreamed about. Where's your office? She asked. Dominic's smile turned dangerous again. Next door. Hope you don't mind the company. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and sighed. I have to take this. Get settled. We'll do official paperwork after lunch, and I'll introduce you to the rest of the team this afternoon. He disappeared down the hallway, already talking in rapid Italian to whoever had called. Lena sank into her desk chair and let herself have one moment of pure, unfiltered victory. She'd done it, taken the risk, made the jump. Everything else, the complications, the questions about who Dominic really was, the way her heart raced whenever he looked at her with those dark eyes, that could wait. For now, she had work to do. Lena Caruso was finally using her degree, finally doing something that mattered, finally stepping into the life she'd dreamed about during all those exhausted nights translating legal documents at 4 in the morning. And if that life came with Dominic Falcone as her boss, well, she'd figure out how to handle that too. She'd spent 3 years handling drunk tourists and condescending customers and the soul-crushing weight of dreams deferred. She could handle one dangerous man with his grandmother's legacy and eyes that saw straight through her professional mask. Probably. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of paperwork, introductions, and the growing realization that Dominic Falcone's cultural center was far more ambitious than she'd imagined. The team consisted of architects, historians, art curators, and a half-dozen other specialists who all treated Dominic with a mixture of professional respect and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. Lena watched the dynamic during their afternoon meeting, the way people measured their words before speaking, how they waited for Dominic's approval before moving forward with ideas. She'd seen that kind of deference before. In courtrooms, in corporate boardrooms, in places where power wasn't just theoretical, but concrete and dangerous. "Lena, what do you think?" She blinked, realizing Dominic had asked her a question while her mind had been cataloging the team's body language. "I'm sorry, what?" "The exhibit text." He gestured to the documents spread across the conference table. "Marco here wants to use modern Italian for accessibility. I think we should include the regional dialects. You're the expert. What's your professional opinion?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Marco, a slim man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, looked like he was holding his breath. Lena picked up the sample text and read through it quickly. Modern Italian, grammatically correct, utterly devoid of the cultural nuance that made language alive instead of academic. "Both," she said finally. Modern Italian for the primary text, with regional dialect callouts in smaller font. That way you're accessible to tourists and Italian Americans who learned the standardized version, but you're also preserving the authentic voices. The dialects tell the story of immigration, how people carried their specific regions with them, instead of some homogenized version of Italy that never really existed. Silence filled the conference room. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, suddenly certain she'd overstepped on her first day. Then Dominic smiled. Not the dangerous one, but something genuine that transformed his entire face. "Exactly. That's exactly the approach I wanted." He turned to Marco. "Work with Lena on implementation. I want samples by end of week." Marco nodded quickly, relief evident in his shoulders. "Of course. Ms. Crusoe, perhaps we could schedule time tomorrow to go over the full exhibit plan." "Lena," she corrected automatically. "And yes, tomorrow works." The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from construction timelines to marketing strategies. Lena took notes, offered opinions when asked, and tried not to stare at the way Dominic commanded the room with quiet authority that made people lean forward to catch every word. When the team finally dispersed, Dominic caught her elbow gently as she gathered her papers. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request, but his tone was soft enough that it didn't feel like an order either. Lena followed him down the hallway to a room she hadn't seen during the morning tour, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books in Italian, Sicilian, and what looked like every regional dialect that had ever existed. "This was going to be storage," Dominic said, running his hand along a shelf. "Then I realized if we're preserving culture, we need to preserve the actual texts, not just translations or summaries, but the real thing." Lena moved closer, reading spines and recognizing titles from her graduate studies. First editions, rare prints, books she'd only seen in university archives. "This collection must have cost more than most people make in a year, several years." He pulled out a worn volume and opened it carefully. "This is my grandmother's recipe book. Handwritten, 50 years old, contains every dish she made from memory after leaving Sicily. Half the instructions are in dialect so specific that modern Italians wouldn't understand them without context." Lena took the book when he offered it, handling the fragile pages with reverence. The handwriting was strong and clear, notes crammed in margins, stains that told stories of meals prepared and memories preserved. "I want this digitized and translated," Dominic said quietly. "Not for the center, for my family. So my children and grandchildren will know where they came from, what their great-grandmother sacrificed, how she kept us connected to Sicily even when she never went back." The vulnerability in his voice caught Lena off guard. This was the man under the expensive suits and controlled power, someone who cared about legacy and memory and the things that couldn't be purchased. "I'll do it personally," she heard herself say. "It deserves that kind of attention." Dominic's dark eyes met hers, and something passed between them, understanding maybe, or recognition of shared values that transcended their very different worlds. "Thank you." He took the book back gently and returned it to its shelf. "I know you have questions about me, about what I do beyond this center. We should probably address that before you get too invested in this job." Lena's pulse quickened. "I know who you are, Dominic. I've known since you told me your name." "Knowing a name isn't the same as understanding what it means. So explain it to me." He studied her for a long moment, like he was deciding how much truth she could handle. "My family has been in New York for 4 generations. We run businesses, some legitimate, some that exist in gray areas the law doesn't adequately address. I've spent the last 10 years trying to move everything into the light, to build something my grandmother could be proud of instead of ashamed of. This center is part of that. This center is all of that." He leaned against the bookshelf, and Lena noticed how tired he looked despite the controlled exterior. "I'm not going to lie to you, Lena. My family has history. My name carries weight that isn't always clean. But this project, what we're building here, this is legitimate. This is real. And I need people around me who believe in the work, not just the paycheck." Lena processed his words carefully, weighing honesty against the version of truth she'd constructed in her head. "Are you in danger? Is working here going to put me in danger?" "No." The answer came immediate and firm. "I keep that life separate from this. Anyone who works at this center is off limits, protected, completely removed from anything that doesn't involve cultural preservation and historical accuracy." "Can you guarantee that?" "I can guarantee that I'll do everything in my power to make sure of it. And in my world, Lena, my power means something." It should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it sounded like a promise backed by resources, and she couldn't begin to measure. "Okay," she said simply. Dominic blinked. "Okay." "I'm here for the work. You've been honest with me. More honest than you probably needed to be. I can work with honesty." She met his eyes directly. "But if that separation ever breaks down, if I ever feel like I'm being pulled into something I didn't sign up for, I'm gone. Exit clause, 2 weeks' notice, exactly like the contract says." "Fair enough?" He extended his hand. "Partners?" "Employer and employee," she corrected, but she shook his hand anyway. That electricity was back, the same current that had run through her the first time they'd touched. Dominic's thumb brushed across her knuckles again, deliberately this time, she was certain, before he released her. "Go home," he said, his voice rougher than before. "It's past 6 and you've had a long day. Tomorrow we start the real work." Lena left the building in a daze, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned and everything she still didn't know. The subway ride home felt surreal, like she was moving through someone else's life instead of her own. Her apartment looked smaller when she walked in, shabbier in contrast to the polished elegance of Dominic's center. But it was hers, paid for with her own work, and that still meant something, even if the work had been soul-crushing until today. She made tea she didn't drink and stared at her phone until midnight, resisting the urge to Google everything about the Falcone family. Whatever she found would either confirm her worst fears or give her information she couldn't unknow. Better to judge Dominic by his actions, by the way he treated her and the work they were building together. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of dark eyes and grandmother's recipes, and a voice that said her name like it meant something. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Lena arrived at the center at 9, worked through translations and cultural consultations until 6, and went home to an apartment that felt increasingly empty. The work was everything she'd hoped for, challenging, meaningful, using every skill she'd developed during her degree program and the years of freelance translation that followed. But it was working with Dominic that surprised her most. He wasn't what she'd expected. Yes, he was intense and commanding and clearly used to having his orders followed without question, but he also listened when she disagreed with him, reconsidered his positions when she presented better arguments, and treated her opinions with the kind of respect she'd rarely experienced in professional settings. They fell into a pattern of working lunches in his office. debating everything from exhibit layouts to the specific connotations of Sicilian phrases that didn't translate cleanly into English. Dominic pushed her intellectually in ways her professors never had, challenging her assumptions and forcing her to defend her positions with more than just academic theory. "You're wrong about the wedding traditions exhibit," he said one afternoon, 3 weeks into her employment. They were sitting in his office reviewing display mock-ups, and Lena had just explained why she thought they should focus on modern Italian-American weddings instead of historical Sicilian ones. "I'm not wrong, I'm practical." She pointed to the demographic research spread across his desk. "Your primary audience is going to be third and fourth generation Italian Americans who want to connect with their heritage. They relate to their grandparents' experiences, not traditions from a Sicily that doesn't exist anymore. So we pander to what's comfortable instead of educating them about where those traditions came from. We meet them where they are and then take them deeper. You can't start with the most academic, inaccessible version of culture and expect people to engage. You have to seduce them first." Dominic's eyebrows rose. Seduce them? Heat crept up Lena's neck as she realized what she'd said. "Make it appealing, accessible. Give them an entry point that feels personal before you challenge them with historical complexity." "I know what seduce means, Lena." His voice carried amusement and something darker. "I'm just surprised to hear you apply it to museum curation. It's the same principle. You don't lead with intimidation, you lead with invitation. Make people want to know more instead of making them feel stupid for not already knowing." Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her with that intensity that never failed to make her pulse quicken. "You're right. We'll do it your way. Start accessible, layer in complexity. But I want both timelines represented. Modern weddings with historical context showing how traditions evolved." "That works?" Lena made notes on her tablet, very aware of his continued attention. "Anything else?" "Have dinner with me." Her stylus froze mid-word. "What?" "Dinner. Tonight. There's a new Sicilian restaurant in Brooklyn I want to try, and I'd rather not eat alone." "That's not—" Lena scrambled for professional footing. "That's not appropriate. You're my boss." "I'm asking you to dinner, not to compromise yourself." Dominic's voice stayed level, but something in his eyes suggested this mattered more than he was letting on. "We've been working together for 3 weeks. We clearly work well as colleagues. I'm curious if that translates outside the office." "This is a terrible idea." "Probably." He smiled slightly. "Have dinner with me anyway." Lena should have said no. Should have maintained the professional boundaries that kept this job safe and uncomplicated. But 3 weeks of working closely with Dominic had shown her glimpses of the man beneath the power. The grandson who treasured his grandmother's legacy, the leader who actually listened to expertise, the person who challenged her intellectually in ways that left her energized instead of exhausted. "One dinner," she heard herself say, as colleagues exploring a restaurant that might be relevant to our work. "Absolutely, pure research." The way Dominic said it suggested he knew exactly what lie they were both telling themselves. "I'll pick you up at 7. I can meet you there." "Lena." He said her name like a reprimand and a caress at once. "Let me pick you up. This is New York. You shouldn't have to navigate Brooklyn alone at night." "I've been navigating New York alone for years." "I'm aware. That doesn't mean you should have to do it tonight." The protective edge in his voice did something to her insides that she absolutely did not want to examine. "Fine. 7 o'clock. She gave him her address and spent the rest of the afternoon trying not to think about what she'd just agreed to. This was work, research, 2 colleagues sharing a meal to better understand the cultural context they were trying to preserve. The fact that she changed outfits 3 times and spent 20 minutes on makeup she normally didn't bother with was completely irrelevant. Dominic arrived exactly at 7, and Lena's breath caught when she opened the door. He'd traded his usual business attire for dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous instead of less formal, like he'd stripped away the civilized veneer and let her see more of who he really was. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Lena glanced down at her navy dress. Simple, appropriate, nothing special. "It's just beautiful," he repeated firmly. "Are you ready?" The car waiting outside was the same black sedan she'd seen him leave in that first night at Bella Notte. No driver this time. Dominic opened the passenger door himself and waited until she was settled before closing it gently. The drive to Brooklyn should have been awkward. Instead, they fell into easy conversation about the center, about translation challenges Lena was facing, about Dominic's vision for the grand opening in 6 months. He drove with confident ease through traffic that would have intimidated her, navigating shortcuts and back streets like someone who knew every inch of the city. The restaurant was tucked into a residential neighborhood, small and unassuming from the outside. Inside, it was warm and intimate, with exposed brick and soft lighting and the kind of atmosphere that suggested people came here to linger, not rush. Dominic, the owner greeted them personally. A woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an appraising look at Lena. Your usual table? Please, Maria. Dominic guided Lena through the restaurant with his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a touch that felt both protective and possessive. This is Lena Caruso. She's going to tell you if your menu lives up to authentic Sicilian standards. Maria laughed, a rich sound that filled the small space. A critic. Finally, someone who will be honest instead of just polite. Come, sit. I'll bring you the real menu, not the tourist version. They settled at a corner table tucked away from the other diners, and Lena tried to ignore how intimate it felt, like they were in their own private world instead of a public restaurant. You set me up, she said once Maria had left. Now I have to actually evaluate the food. I know you will anyway. Dominic poured wine from the bottle Maria had brought, a Nero d'Avola that probably cost more than Lena used to make in a week at Bella Notte. You can't turn off that analytical part of your brain. I've watched you dissect every piece of writing that crosses your desk. That's my job. It's who you are, he raised his glass. 2 authentic experiences. Lena clinked her glass against his, trying to ignore the way his eyes held hers across the table. To research. Sure, research. His smile suggested he saw right through her deflection. The food, when it arrived, was extraordinary. Maria brought dish after dish, arancini with ragu that tasted like someone's grandmother's secret recipe, pasta con le sarde that balanced sweet and savory perfectly, caponata that made Lena close her eyes and remember summers in Sicily visiting her own grandmother before she passed. Verdict? Dominic asked, watching her taste each dish with focused attention. It's real, Lena said quietly. Not performance, not fusion, just honest Sicilian food made by someone who understands the ingredients have history. Maria learned this from someone who mattered to her. Her mother, who learned from her mother, 3 generations of recipes, all preserved exactly. Dominic took a bite of the pasta, and Lena noticed he ate with the same intense focus he brought to everything else. Maria's trying to get her daughter interested in taking over, but the daughter wants to be a lawyer instead of a cook. That's sad. Is it? He set down his fork. Or is it progress? The daughter has choices Maria never did. She can honor her heritage without being bound to it. Lena considered that, turning it over in her mind. I suppose that's what we're trying to do with the center. Preserve the heritage while acknowledging that people get to choose how they engage with it. Exactly. Dominic's expression softened. You understand the mission better than most of my team. They see it as historical preservation. You see it as creating bridges between past and present. Because that's what it is. Culture isn't static. It's living, breathing, evolving. We're not building a museum of dead traditions. We're showing how those traditions still matter, how they shape identity even when people think they've moved past them. Tell me about your family. The request was quiet, almost tentative. You said your grandmother was Sicilian. What about your parents? Lena took a sip of wine, buying time. My father was second-generation Italian-American. My mother is Irish-American. They divorced when I was 10. Dad moved back to Sicily when I was 15, said he wanted to reconnect with his roots. Really, he just wanted to escape child support and a life that hadn't turned out the way he planned. That must have been hard. It was honest. Lena shrugged, trying to make it matter less than it did. He chose what he needed over what I needed. At least he was clear about it instead of pretending he cared while abandoning me emotionally. Dominic's jaw tightened. Clarity doesn't make abandonment acceptable. No, but it makes it easier to process. She met his eyes directly. What about your family, Besides your grandmother. My parents died when I was 8. Car accident. He said it matter-of-factly, but Lena heard the old grief underneath. Nonna Rosa raised me. Taught me Sicilian, cooking, history, everything that made me understand where I came from. She also taught me that power without purpose is just violence, and violence without restraint is just chaos. Is that why you're trying to move your family business legitimate? That's why I've spent 10 years carefully extracting us from situations my father and grandfather built. Dominic's voice hardened. They thought power meant control. Nonna taught me it means responsibility. The center is proof that I understood her lessons. Lena reached across the table and touched his hand before she could think better of it. She'd be proud of you. Dominic turned his hand over, catching her fingers and holding them gently. I hope so. Some days I'm certain. Others I wonder if I'm just performing redemption instead of actually achieving it. The fact that you question it means it's real. Lena knew she should pull her hand back, reestablish professional distance. Instead, she let her fingers stay tangled with his. Performed redemption doesn't come with doubt. They sat like that for a long moment, the restaurant fading away until it was just the two of them and the truth hanging between them. Finally, Dominic released her hand and signaled for the check. The drive back to her apartment was quieter, weighted with everything they'd shared and everything they hadn't said. When Dominic pulled up outside her building, Lena expected him to stay in the car, let her escape to safety and distance. Instead, he got out and walked her to the door. Thank you for dinner, Lena said, fumbling for her keys. The research was valuable. Lena. Dominic stepped closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel his warmth. We both know this wasn't research. Then what was it? Honestly? I don't know. He lifted his hand like he might touch her face, then dropped it. I know I wanted to spend time with you outside the office. I know I enjoyed every minute of it. And I know I want to do it again, even though it complicates things we probably shouldn't complicate. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. You're my boss. I'm aware. This is a terrible idea. You've said that before. His lips curved into that dangerous smile. You still had dinner with me. That was a mistake. Was it? He moved even closer, and Lena felt herself leaning in despite every logical reason not to. Because from where I'm standing, it felt like the first completely honest thing either of us has done since you started working for me. Dominic, I'm not asking you for anything, Lena. I'm just telling you the truth. I'm attracted to you, intellectually, personally, in ways that have nothing to do with work and everything to do with who you are when you're challenging me or defending your positions or looking at historical recipes like they're sacred texts. He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. Then he was walking back to his car, leaving Lena standing in her doorway with her keys in her shaking hand and her mind spinning with possibilities she absolutely should not be considering. She made it inside, locked the door, and leaned against it while her pulse slowly returned to normal. This was dangerous, complicated, exactly the kind of situation that ended badly when power dynamics and attraction collided. But the memory of Dominic's hand holding hers, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and rare, the honesty in his voice when he admitted his uncertainty, that was real. That mattered. Lena pushed off the door and headed to her bedroom, already knowing she wouldn't sleep tonight. Tomorrow, she'd go back to the office and reestablish professional boundaries. Tomorrow, she'd be smart and careful and practical. Tonight, she let herself remember the way Dominic had said her name like a promise, and wonder what it might mean if she was brave enough to find out. Morning came too quickly, bringing gray light through her curtains and the sharp awareness that she'd have to face Dominic in approximately 2 hours. Lena dressed with deliberate care, choosing professional armor. A charcoal blazer, cream blouse, dark slacks that said nothing about the way her stomach twisted at the thought of seeing him again. The subway ride felt longer than usual, every stop giving her time to rehearse the speech she'd prepared at 3 in the morning when sleep finally gave up pretending to come. Professional boundaries, mutual respect, the importance of keeping personal and professional separate for the integrity of the project. It all sounded reasonable in her head, mature, logical. Then she walked into the center and found Dominic in the main gallery, sleeves rolled up and hands covered in dust, personally helping the construction crew install exhibition cases with the kind of focused intensity he brought to everything. He looked up when she entered, and something flashed across his face too quickly to name before the careful mask returned. "Lena! Good morning!" "Good morning!" She clutched her bag tighter, very aware of the construction workers pretending not to watch their interaction. "I didn't expect to see you doing manual labor. I don't ask my people to do anything I won't do myself." He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth that was already filthy. "Besides, these cases are displaying my grandmother's collection. I want to make sure they're perfect." The vulnerability in that admission did something to Lena's carefully constructed resolve. This wasn't her boss wielding power. This was a grandson honoring memory with his own hands. "Can I help?" Dominic's eyebrows rose. "You're a translator, not a construction worker. I'm also Sicilian enough to know that when someone's building something important, you don't just stand there watching, you help." She set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "What needs doing?" For a moment, Dominic just looked at her, something warm and surprised in his expression. Then he handed her a level. "Make sure the cases are perfectly straight. They're displaying lace my grandmother made by hand. It deserves precision." They worked side by side for the next hour, Lena calling out measurements while Dominic made minute adjustments that most people wouldn't notice but that transformed the installations from adequate to perfect. The construction crew gradually relaxed, joking in Italian and Spanish, including both Dominic and Lena in their easy camaraderie. "Your Italian is better than mine," one of the workers, Giovanni, said to Lena during a water break. "Where'd you learn?" "My grandmother, and then 8 years of formal study because I was stubborn enough to think I could make a career out of it." "And now you work for Dominic Falcone, so I'd say the stubborn paid off." Giovanni grinned. "He's particular about language. Fired the last translator for using Google Translate on a legal document." Lena glanced at Dominic, who was examining a case joint with fierce concentration. "He fired someone for that." "Fired him with a severance package and a reference letter," Giovanni corrected. "But yeah, made it clear that cutting corners on cultural accuracy wasn't acceptable. We all learned real fast, quality matters here, or you find somewhere else to work." "He paying you to gossip about me, Gio?" Dominic asked without looking up. "He's paying me to install cases, which I'm doing." Giovanni winked at Lena. "The gossip is free entertainment." By the time they finished, Lena's blazer was covered in dust and her carefully professional appearance had been thoroughly destroyed. She caught her reflection in one of the polished cases and laughed, hair escaping its neat bun, smudge of dirt across her cheek, looking nothing like the put-together translator she'd tried to present. "You have something—" Dominic gestured to her face. "I'm aware. I look like I've been installing exhibition cases." "You look like you care about the work." He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently wiped the smudge from her cheek with his thumb. "Thank you for helping. You didn't have to." The touch was brief, professional, and absolutely destroyed every boundary Lena had tried to rebuild overnight. She forced herself to step back, to put space between them before she did something stupid like lean into his hand. "I should clean up. We have the dialect meeting at 10. "Lena," Dominic's voice stopped her halfway to the door. "About last night, we don't have to talk about it." "I think we do." He moved closer, lowering his voice so the construction crew wouldn't hear. "I was honest with you, maybe more honest than I should have been, but I don't want that honesty to make you uncomfortable here. If you need me to step back, to keep everything completely professional, I will. The work matters more than my personal feelings." Lena's chest tightened. He was giving her an out, a clean way to reestablish boundaries and pretend the dinner had never happened. The smart move would be to take it. "What if I don't know what I need?" The words came out quieter than she intended. Dominic's expression softened. "Then we figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just honest conversation when you're ready to have it." "That's very reasonable." "I'm a reasonable man, Lena, despite what my reputation might suggest." Before she could respond, Marco appeared in the gallery entrance, tablet in hand and anxiety written across his features. "Dominic, we have a problem with the Ellis Island partnership. They're pulling out." Dominic's entire demeanor shifted. The gentle man who'd just offered patience transforming into someone who commanded empires with the lift of an eyebrow. My office. Now. Lena, give me 20 minutes and then we'll do the dialect meeting. He strode off with Marco hurrying to keep up, leaving Lena standing among the exhibition cases feeling like she'd just witnessed a magic trick. How did he do that? Shift so completely between vulnerability and authority, between the grandson installing cases for his grandmother's memory and the businessman who made organizations reconsider their decisions with a single meeting. She used the 20 minutes to clean up, fix her hair, and try to reconcile the different versions of Dominic Falcone into one coherent person. By the time she knocked on his office door, she'd almost succeeded in putting him back into a safe mental category labeled complicated boss instead of dangerous attraction. Then she walked in and found him on the phone, speaking rapid Sicilian with enough controlled fury that she caught words about disrespect and reconsideration and terms that would make his grandmother wash his mouth out with soap. He gestured her to a chair without breaking verbal stride, and Lena sat, fascinated despite herself by this version of Dominic. He wasn't shouting, his voice stayed level, almost conversational. But something in his tone made it clear that whoever was on the other end of that call was making a serious mistake. They'll reconsider, he said finally, switching to English. And when they do, the terms will be less favorable than what we originally offered. Thank you for your time. He ended the call and set his phone down with careful precision, taking a moment to breathe before turning to Lena. Ellis Island Partnership is back on. Apparently they'd received a better offer from a competing cultural center and thought they could leverage us into improving our terms. What did you say to change their minds? I reminded them that the Falcone name carries certain advantages beyond money: access, influence, connections that open doors their other offer can't match. His smile turned sharp. And I may have mentioned that burning bridges with my family tends to create difficulties in New York's cultural scene. Lena should have been disturbed by the casual display of power. Instead, she found herself curious about the mechanics of it. That was a threat. That was a statement of fact. Dominic leaned back in his chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. I don't make threats, Lena. I make promises and state consequences. There's a difference. Is there? A threat implies I might not follow through. I always follow through. He gestured to the document spread across his desk. But enough about that. Let's talk about dialect preservation before I have to make any more phone calls that require creative vocabulary. They spent the next 2 hours deep in the complexities of regional Italian dialects, debating which ones to feature prominently and how to present them without overwhelming visitors who might only speak English. Lena found herself arguing passionately for including Calabrese alongside the more common Sicilian and Neapolitan, while Dominic pushed for Venetian to represent northern Italy's contributions to immigration. You're being stubborn, she said, pointing to the demographic data. Calabrese immigration was significant. We can't ignore that history just because you personally prefer Venetian. I'm not being stubborn, I'm being strategic. We have limited space and unlimited dialects. We have to make choices that serve the broader narrative. The broader narrative is incomplete without Calabrese representation. You're letting your personal preferences override historical accuracy. Dominic's eyes flashed with something that might have been irritation or might have been respect. Fine. Make your case. Convince me why Calabrese deserves space over Venetian. Lena launched into a detailed explanation of Calabrian immigration patterns, their influence on American-Italian culture, and the specific linguistic features that distinguished Calabrese from other Southern dialects. She pulled up census data, historical records, and linguistic analyses, building her argument with the same precision she'd use in an academic paper. When she finished, Dominic was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You're magnificent when you're passionate about something. He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather instead of making her pulse race. Calabrese gets included. You're right. The historical record supports it, and I was letting personal bias cloud my judgment. Lena blinked. You're agreeing with me. I'm agreeing with your evidence. There's a difference. He made notes on his tablet. This is why I hired you, Lena. You don't just accept my decisions because I'm paying you. You fight for what's right, even when it's inconvenient. That's just doing my job. It's doing your job exceptionally well. Dominic looked up from his tablet. Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth even when it contradicts me. That's rare. Maybe you should hire better people. Maybe I just did. The compliment settled warm in Lena's chest, more affecting than it should be. She busied herself organizing her notes, very aware of Dominic's continued attention. Have lunch with me, he said quietly. We're working. We've been working for 2 hours straight. We're entitled to eat. He stood, moving around his desk. There's a place 3 blocks from here that makes the best arancini outside of Sicily. We can discuss the wedding traditions exhibit while we eat. That's what we said about dinner last night. And we did discuss work. His lips curved. We also discussed other things. Both conversations had value. Lena knew she should refuse, should maintain the boundaries she'd tried so hard to reestablish that morning. But the truth was, she didn't want to. She enjoyed talking to Dominic, enjoyed the way he challenged her thinking, and respected her expertise and looked at her like she was someone worth knowing beyond her professional utility. 1 hour, she said, and we actually discussed the wedding exhibit. 1 hour. Actual work discussion. He grabbed his jacket. Though I make no promises about what we discuss after the work part is done. The restaurant was exactly what Dominic had promised. Small, authentic, with arancini that tasted like someone's nonna had made them that morning. They claimed a corner table and spread out notes about wedding traditions, but within 20 minutes, the conversation had drifted to broader topics. Tell me about your degree program, Dominic said, stealing one of her arancini despite having ordered his own. What made you choose translation specifically? Language is power, Lena said simply. The ability to move between worlds, to carry meaning across barriers most people can't cross. That's real influence. I wanted to be the person who made communication possible. And instead you ended up serving overpriced wine to tourists. For a while. But I'm here now, doing the work I trained for. She met his eyes. Thanks to you giving me a chance. Thanks to you being exceptional enough to deserve the chance. Dominic's expression grew serious. I don't do charity, Lena. Every person I hire earns their position. You've already proven yourself valuable. The dialect work alone has exceeded what I expected. It's only been 3 weeks. 3 weeks where you've challenged every lazy assumption, fought for historical accuracy, and made this center better than it would have been without you. He leaned forward slightly. You know what you're worth, right? You understand that you're not replaceable. Lena's throat tightened. She'd spent so long feeling disposable. Another waitress, another freelance translator, another person struggling to make rent and prove her expensive education hadn't been a waste. I'm learning, she said quietly. Good. Dominic's voice gentled. Because you deserve to know. You deserve to work somewhere that recognizes your value instead of exploiting your desperation. The words hit harder than they should, stirring emotions Lena had carefully locked away. She'd told herself for years that the struggle was temporary, that eventually her talent would be recognized. But hearing Dominic say it, hearing someone powerful acknowledge what she'd known all along, made something crack in her chest. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. He paused. And maybe stop looking so surprised when I appreciate it. They finished lunch discussing wedding traditions after all. Lena explaining the symbolic significance of almond confetti and Dominic sharing stories about his grandmother's wedding that had somehow involved a goat and a scandal that the family still wouldn't discuss in detail. By the time they returned to the center, Lena's sides hurt from laughing, and her earlier tension had dissolved into something easier. The afternoon passed quickly with meetings and translation work, and Lena was so focused on a particularly complex dialect comparison that she didn't notice how late it had gotten until Dominic appeared in her office doorway. It's past 7. She blinked at her computer screen, then at the darkness outside her window. Oh, I didn't realize you also didn't eat dinner. I checked. He held up a bag from the arancini place. I brought food. Take a break before you go blind from staring at historical Sicilian marriage contracts. You didn't have to. I know. He set the bag on her desk. Eat anyway. Consider it a professional courtesy to make sure my best translator doesn't collapse from malnutrition. Lena wanted to argue, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly enough to make Dominic smile. Fine, but you're eating too. I'm not letting you pretend you've had dinner when I know you've been in back-to-back meetings all afternoon. They ate in her office, Lena clearing space on her desk while Dominic claimed the chair across from her. It felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the comfortable silence between people who didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. Can I ask you something? Lena said finally, setting down her arancini. Always. Last night you said you didn't know what dinner was beyond research. Have you figured it out yet? Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with that unsettling intensity. Honestly? No. I know I wanted to spend time with you. I know I enjoyed every minute. And I know I'm standing in your office at 7:30 on a Tuesday with takeout food because the idea of you working alone and hungry bothered me more than it professionally should. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. He leaned forward. What about you? Have you figured out what you want this to be? Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. The smart answer was easy. Professional colleagues, nothing more. Boundaries firmly in place. But sitting across from Dominic in the soft lamplight of her office, watching him look at her like she was a puzzle worth solving, she couldn't quite make herself say it. I don't know, she admitted. You're my boss. You're also the most interesting person I've talked to in years. Those two things probably shouldn't coexist. Probably not, Dominic agreed, but they do anyway. So what do we do about it? We're honest. We communicate. We make sure that whatever this is, or becomes, doesn't compromise the work or put you in a position where you feel pressured. He held her gaze steadily. Your comfort and your autonomy matter more than my interest, Lena. If this becomes something you don't want, you tell me and it stops. No consequences, no retaliation, no professional fallout. I need you to believe that. I do believe you. And surprisingly, she did. But that doesn't make it less complicated. No, it just makes it honest. They finished eating in silence, and when Dominic finally stood to leave, he paused in her doorway. For what it's worth, I'm glad you took this job. Even if nothing else ever comes of whatever this is, I'm glad you're here. After he left, Lena sat in her office staring at the empty takeout containers and trying to make sense of the knot of feelings in her chest. She was falling for him, not just the attraction, but something deeper. The way he honored his grandmother's memory with his own hands. The way he fought for cultural authenticity with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. The way he looked at her like she mattered beyond her professional utility. It was dangerous and complicated and probably a terrible idea. And she was going to let it happen anyway. The next morning, Lena arrived at the center with a plan. She'd spent half the night thinking about what Dominic had said, about honesty and communication, and making sure nothing compromised her autonomy. If they were going to do this, whatever this was, she needed to set terms. She found him in his office, reviewing construction timelines with the project manager. When he saw her in the doorway, he dismissed the manager with a quiet word and gestured her inside. Close the door, Lena said. Dominic's eyebrows rose, but he complied. That sounds serious. It is. She stayed standing, needing the height advantage, even though he still managed to look commanding while sitting. If we're doing this, if we're exploring whatever is happening between us, I need ground rules. I'm listening. First, work stays separate. We don't let personal feelings compromise professional decisions. If I tell you you're wrong about something work-related, it's not personal, and you don't take it that way. Agreed. Second, I want complete transparency about your family business. I don't need details about things I shouldn't know, but I need honesty about when your other life might intersect with this one. Dominic's expression sobered. That's fair. I promise you'll know if anything shifts that could affect your safety or comfort. Third, this was the hard one. If I decide this is too much, if I need to step back, you let me. No fighting it, no trying to change my mind, no making me feel guilty for protecting myself. Lena. He stood, moving around his desk but stopping a respectful distance away. I already promised you that. You have complete autonomy here, personally and professionally. If you want to walk away tomorrow, you walk away. The only thing I ask is that you're honest about why, so I know if I did something that crossed a line. You haven't. Good, but the promise stands regardless. He studied her carefully. Are those all your terms? One more. You don't use your power or your money to try to control me. I'm not a possession, and I'm not someone you can buy or intimidate into compliance. Something fierce and protective flashed across Dominic's face. I would never— I know, but I needed to say it anyway. He nodded slowly. Understood. My turn? Lena hadn't expected that. You have terms? Just one. If someone threatens you, disrespects you, or makes you uncomfortable in any way connected to me or my name, you tell me immediately. I can't protect you from things I don't know about. I can protect myself. I'm aware. You've been doing it alone for years. His voice gentled. I'm asking you to let me stand with you instead of behind you. Partnership, not protection. The distinction mattered. Lena felt some of her tension ease. Okay, I can agree to that. Then we have a deal. Dominic extended his hand. Lena took it, expecting a handshake. Instead, he turned her hand over and pressed a kiss to her palm. Brief, gentle, and absolutely devastating. Say it again, he said quietly, still holding her hand. Say what? What you called me that first night. The Sicilian insult you thought I didn't understand. His eyes held challenge and heat. Say it again, looking at me this time. Lena's breath caught. He'd heard her after all, remembered it across weeks and dinners and careful negotiations. You want me to insult you? I want you to be real with me. No professional mask, no careful politeness, just Lena Caruso telling me exactly what she thinks. Her pulse hammered. This was a test. Not of obedience, but of honesty. Of whether she'd retreat behind safety or step into the dangerous truth between them. Lena pulled her hand free and met his eyes directly. Testa di cazzo. Dominic's smile transformed his entire face, fierce and delighted. There she is. You're impossible. And you're magnificent. He stepped closer, giving her room to move away if she wanted. I'm going to kiss you now, Lena. Tell me if that's not what you want. She should say no, should maintain professional distance and sensible boundaries. Instead, she closed the space between them and tilted her face up. You talk too much. His laugh was quiet and warm, and then his mouth was on hers, and everything else disappeared. The kiss was nothing like she'd expected, not aggressive or demanding, but thorough and questioning, like he was learning her preferences with the same focused attention he brought to everything else. Lena's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under expensive fabric. His fingers tangled gently in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and she made a sound that should have embarrassed her, but instead made him pull her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder than professional colleagues had any right to, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. Worth the wait, he murmured. Presumptuous. What if I'd said no? Then I would have stepped back and pretended my heart wasn't pounding loud enough to hear in New Jersey. He pulled away slightly to meet her eyes. But you didn't say no. No, Lena agreed. I didn't. They stood there for a moment longer, the weight of what they'd just done settling around them like morning fog. Then reality crashed back in the form of voices in the hallway outside Dominic's office, and they stepped apart with the practiced ease of people who understood that some things needed to stay private. We should probably get back to work, Lena said, smoothing her hair and trying to look like she hadn't just been kissed senseless by her boss. Probably. Dominic's voice carried amusement and something darker. Though I'm finding it difficult to care about exhibition layouts when you're looking at me like that. Like what? Like you're trying to decide if kissing me again would be reckless or inevitable. Heat crept up Lena's neck. You're very sure of yourself. I'm observant. There's a difference. He moved back to his desk, putting professional distance between them, even as his eyes promised this conversation wasn't finished. We have the board meeting in an hour. After that, I need to handle some family business that doesn't involve the center. Will you have dinner with me tonight? Real dinner, not work research. Lena knew she should take time to process what had just happened, should probably talk to someone objective about the wisdom of getting involved with Dominic Falcone. Instead, she heard herself say, What time? 7. I'll pick you up. I can meet you, Lena. He said her name like a reprimand. Let me pick you up. Let me take you somewhere nice and treat you the way you deserve to be treated. You've spent years taking care of yourself alone. Let someone take care of you for one evening. The words shouldn't have affected her so deeply. She was independent, capable, had been managing her own life since her father left and her mother checked out emotionally. But something about the way Dominic said it, not pitying, not patronizing, just offering partnership, made her throat tight. "Okay," she managed. 7 o'clock. The board meeting was exactly as tedious as Lena had feared, full of budget discussions and timeline concerns that had nothing to do with the actual cultural work. But watching Dominic navigate the politics was fascinating. He knew exactly when to push, when to compromise, when to deploy that dangerous smile that made people reconsider their positions. "You're a natural diplomat," she told him afterward, gathering her notes while board members filtered out. "I'm a pragmatist." Dominic loosened his tie slightly, and Lena tried not to notice how the simple gesture made him look dangerous. "Diplomacy is just violence with better vocabulary." "That's a terrible philosophy." "That's an honest philosophy." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "The board wants to cut costs by using cheaper materials in the exhibits. I convinced them that cutting costs would damage the center's reputation and ultimately hurt their investment. Diplomacy. But if they'd pushed harder, I would have reminded them that the Falcone name attached to this project means something, and disappointing me has consequences. Violence. You didn't actually threaten them. I didn't have to. They know who I am, what my family represents. The threat is implicit in every conversation I have." His expression grew serious. "That's the world I live in, Lena. Power and consequences, and the careful balance between the two. I need you to understand that before we go any further." Lena studied him carefully, seeing past the expensive suit to the man who'd installed exhibition cases with his own hands and talked about his grandmother with reverence. "I understand you're complicated. I understand your world operates on different rules than mine. But I also understand that you're trying to build something legitimate here, something that matters beyond power and consequences. And if those two worlds collide, then we deal with it together." She met his eyes directly. "You promised me honesty and transparency. I'm choosing to trust that promise." Something shifted in Dominic's expression, relief maybe, or gratitude that she saw him as more than just his reputation. "I won't betray that trust." "I know." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so gentle it made her breath catch. "Go finish your translation work. I'll see you at 7. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness, every minute feeling like an hour while Lena tried to focus on Calabrese dialect documentation instead of replaying that kiss in Dominic's office. By the time she left the center at 5, her nerves were stretched tight with anticipation. She spent an hour agonizing over what to wear before settling on a deep green dress that made her eyes look brighter and her confidence feel less manufactured. Makeup took another 30 minutes, and by the time Dominic knocked on her door at exactly 7, she'd nearly convinced herself this was a terrible idea, at least 6 times. Then she opened the door and forgot every reasonable objection. Dominic had traded his usual business attire for dark slacks and a charcoal shirt that somehow made his eyes look even darker, more intense. He held a single white rose, which he offered with a slight smile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You brought me a flower. My grandmother taught me that respect starts with small gestures." He waited while she put the rose in water, then offered his arm. "Ready?" The restaurant was in Manhattan, tucked into a building Lena would have walked past 100 times without noticing. Inside, it was elegant and intimate, with soft lighting and the kind of quiet that came from excellent soundproofing and clientele who valued discretion. "Mr. Falcone." The host greeted them with familiarity. "Your table is ready." They were led to a private corner booth that felt like its own small world, separated from the main dining room by frosted glass panels and strategic placement. Dominic waited until she was seated before settling across from her, and Lena noticed the way he positioned himself to have a clear view of both the entrance and the rest of the restaurant. "Habit," he said, catching her observation. "I'm sorry, I can move if it makes you uncomfortable." "It doesn't. I'm just noticing." She accepted the wine menu from their server. "Do you ever relax completely, or is awareness something you can't turn off?" "With you, I'm learning to turn it down, if not off." He ordered wine without looking at the menu, then turned his full attention to her. Tell me something I don't know about you. That's a broad request. Then start anywhere. I want to know who Lena Caruso is when she's not being my brilliant translator or defending Calabrese dialect inclusion. Lena considered this question while their wine arrived, a Brunello that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. I wanted to work for the UN. That was the dream when I started my degree, simultaneous interpretation for international diplomacy, helping world leaders understand each other. What changed? Reality. The competition for those positions is brutal, and I couldn't afford the unpaid internships that lead to actual jobs. So I took what work I could get, freelance translation, waiting tables, telling myself it was temporary until it became permanent. Dominic's expression darkened. The system is designed to keep out people without family money or connections. Talent doesn't matter if you can't afford to work for free long enough to prove yourself. Exactly. And by the time I'd saved enough to maybe try for those internships, I was too old, too far removed from my degree, too exhausted from working 2 jobs to compete with fresh graduates who had the luxury of focus. Until I offered you a way back in. Until you offered me work that uses my actual skills, yes. Lena met his eyes. I'm grateful for that. But I also need you to know I'm not here just because you gave me a job. I'm here because the work matters, and because you... She trailed off, uncertain how to finish. Because I what? Because you see me. Not just what I can do for you, but who I am underneath the professional competence. That's rare. Dominic reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You're rare, Lena. The job was real. I needed someone with your skills. But the reason I came back to that restaurant, the reason I couldn't stop thinking about you after one sharp conversation that had nothing to do with your professional qualifications. Then what was it? You treated me like a person instead of a name. You told me no when I was being presumptuous. You insulted me in Sicilian and didn't apologize for it. His smile turned self-deprecating. I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. You told me the truth, and I've been chasing that honesty ever since. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. That's a lot of pressure to put on one conversation. I'm not putting pressure on anything. I'm just being honest about why I wanted to know you better. He released her hand as their first course arrived. Now tell me something else. Something that has nothing to do with work or dreams or anything serious. They spent the next 2 hours talking about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, terrible movies they secretly loved, the specific way New York smelled in summer that tourists hated but natives found comforting. Dominic told her about learning to cook with his grandmother, about the time he'd tried to impress a girl in high school by making osso buco and nearly burned down the kitchen. She was not impressed, he admitted, laughing at the memory. Told me any man who couldn't cook a simple braise wasn't worth her time. Smart girl. Devastating girl. I spent the next year learning to cook properly just to prove I could. His expression grew nostalgic. Nonna Rosa supervised every attempt, critiquing my technique and telling me stories about Sicily while I chopped vegetables. I learned more about my heritage in that kitchen than I ever did in school. Is that why you're so passionate about cultural preservation? Part of it. The other part is guilt. He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. My father and grandfather built power on violence and intimidation. They treated our heritage like a costume to wear when it served their purposes and discard when it didn't. This center is me trying to honor what they corrupted. Lena heard the weight in those words, the burden of inherited legacy and chosen redemption. You're not responsible for their choices. No, but I'm responsible for what I do with the empire they built. I can let it continue down the same path, or I can transform it into something that actually serves the community instead of exploiting it. He met her eyes. The center is proof that transformation is possible, that the Falcone name can mean something beyond fear. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. His voice went quiet. Some days I'm certain. Others I wonder if I'm just a better class of criminal, using culture and charity to wash blood money clean. You're not. Or, Lena said it with certainty. Criminals don't question their morality. They don't spend hours installing exhibition cases by hand or argue about dialect representation. You're building something real, Dominic, something that matters. Because you're helping me build it. He signaled for the check. Come on, there's somewhere I want to take you. It's almost 10. I know. Trust me? Lena shouldn't. Should be cautious about following a man she'd known for barely a month to an undisclosed location late at night. But she'd already crossed so many lines tonight, might as well cross one more. I trust you. They drove through Manhattan into Brooklyn, the city lights giving way to quieter residential neighborhoods. Dominic finally pulled up outside a small community garden tucked between brownstones. The gate secured with a combination lock he opened with practiced ease. This is private property, Lena observed. It's my property. Well, my grandmother's property. She bought this lot 40 years ago and turned it into a garden for the neighborhood. He led her through rows of vegetables and herbs, past benches where elderly Italian immigrants gathered during the day. She maintained it until she died, then left instructions for me to keep it going. They stopped at a small grape arbor in the garden's center, strings of lights creating a canopy of stars overhead. A bench sat beneath the vines, worn smooth by decades of use. This was her favorite spot, Dominic said quietly. She'd sit here in the evenings and talk to my grandfather's photograph, tell him about her day, argue with him about family decisions, laugh at jokes only they understood. Lena settled onto the bench, moved by the intimacy of sharing this space. You miss her? Every day. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She was the only person who knew all of me, the grandson who learned to cook, the businessman who made hard decisions, the man trying to be better than his blood. She saw everything and loved me anyway. That's what family does. That's what she did. The rest of my family loves the power I represent more than the person I am. He turned to face her. That's why this matters so much, Lena. The center, the cultural preservation, all of it. It's me proving I learned her lessons. That I understand legacy is about more than money and fear. Lena reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. You're proving it every day. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by growing things and city sounds muted by distance. Above them, the lights twinkled like captured stars, and Lena felt something shift in her chest, not falling in love, not yet, but the dangerous certainty that she could. I want to show you something, Dominic said finally. He pulled out his phone and navigated to a photo album, then handed it to her. The images were of his grandmother, young and fierce-eyed in Sicily, older and proud in New York, ancient and gentle, surrounded by family. But it was the last photo that caught Lena's breath. Rosa Falcone in her garden, hands dirty and smile radiant, looking at the camera like whoever held it was her entire world. That's what I'm trying to preserve, Dominic said quietly. Not just recipes and dialects, but the spirit behind them, the courage it took to leave everything familiar, the strength it took to build new lives in a place that didn't always welcome them, the love that kept culture alive across generations. You're doing it, Lena said, handing back his phone. The center captures all of that. We're doing it. I couldn't build this without you. Before Lena could respond, Dominic's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and his entire expression changed. The gentle man sharing memories transforming into someone harder, more dangerous. I need to take this. He stood, moving a few steps away. Falcone. Lena couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dominic's body language shift, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, one hand curling into a fist before deliberately relaxing. How bad? He asked. Pause. And the family knows? Another pause. I'll handle it. Give me 24 hours. He ended the call and stood still for a moment, visibly pulling himself back together before turning to face her. I need to cut tonight short. There's a situation that requires my attention. The other side of your life. Yes. He moved back to the bench but didn't sit. I'm sorry. I wanted to give you a perfect evening, and instead I'm leaving you to deal with problems that have nothing to do with cultural centers and everything to do with the parts of my life I'm trying to move past. Lena stood, moving close enough to touch his arm. You promised me honesty and transparency. This is both. You didn't hide the call or lie about why you need to leave. That doesn't make it fair to you. Fair doesn't exist in the real world, Dominic. Only choices and consequences. She used his own words back at him. You're choosing to be honest with me. I'm choosing to accept that your life is complicated. That seems fair enough. Something fierce and grateful flashed across his face. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He kissed her then, quick and hard and full of promises he couldn't make tonight. I'll drive you home. Is it safe for you to be driving around if there's a situation that needs your attention? Dominic's smile turned sharp. The situation isn't about me being in danger, Lena. It's about me deciding how to handle someone who's created danger for others. The reminder of who he was, what he was capable of, should have frightened her. Instead, Lena found herself curious about this other side of Dominic Falcone, the one that made grown men reconsider their decisions with a single phone call. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When Dominic pulled up outside her building, he killed the engine and turned to face her. I want you to know something, he said carefully. Whatever I handle tonight, whatever decisions I make about the situation that called me away, none of it will touch you or the center. I keep my promises about separation. I believe you. Good. He cupped her face gently, thumb stroking her cheek. I had a wonderful evening, even the abbreviated version. So did I. Lena leaned into his touch. Handle your situation. I'll see you tomorrow at the center. About that, Dominic dropped his hand reluctantly. I might need to take a few days away from the office. There are some family matters that need direct attention. Will you be safe? Always. I'm very good at staying safe, Lena. It's what I do. She wanted to ask more, what the situation was, what kind of danger existed, how he planned to handle it, but she'd promised not to ask for details about things she shouldn't know, and this clearly fell into that category. Call me if you need anything, she said instead. Dominic's expression softened. I will. And Lena? Thank you. For what? For trusting me enough to let me leave without demanding explanations. For understanding that some parts of my life require discretion. For being exactly who you are instead of who you think I need you to be. He kissed her once more, slower this time, like he was memorizing the taste of her. Then he was gone, driving off into the New York night to handle violence with better vocabulary. Lena made it inside and locked her door before letting herself feel the full weight of what she'd gotten into. She was falling for a man who operated in shadows and power plays, who could shift between cultural preservationist and something far more dangerous with nothing but a phone call. She should be terrified, should be rethinking every choice that led her to this moment. Instead, she touched her lips where Dominic had kissed her and smiled. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Dominic was absent from the center, handling whatever family business had called him away that night in the garden. He texted occasionally, brief updates that he was fine, questions about specific translations, reminders to eat lunch instead of working through it. Lena threw herself into the dialect project, using work to avoid thinking about where Dominic was and what he might be doing. Marco proved to be an excellent collaborator, bringing historical context that complemented her linguistic expertise. By the third day, they'd created a comprehensive framework for the dialect exhibits that exceeded Lena's initial vision. This is exceptional work, Marco said, reviewing their final documentation. Dominic's going to be very pleased. Assuming he comes back before the grand opening, Lena muttered. Marco gave her a knowing look. He always comes back, and he's never been gone this long for anything that wasn't critical. He paused, clearly debating whether to say more. He cares about this center more than anything else in his life. The fact that he's willing to leave it even temporarily tells you how serious the situation must be. Do you know what happened? I know better than to ask. Marco's expression turned serious. I've worked with the Falcone family for 15 years, Lena. I learned early that some questions don't have safe answers. But I can tell you this, Dominic is nothing like his father or grandfather. Whatever he's handling, he's doing it the right way. His way. The reassurance helped, even if it didn't completely erase the anxiety coiling in Lena's chest. She'd known getting involved with Dominic meant accepting complications. She just hadn't expected to be tested so soon. On the fourth day, Lena arrived at the center to find Dominic's car in the parking area. Her heart jumped, relief and anticipation flooding through her in equal measure. She found him in his office, looking tired but unharmed, reviewing construction updates like he'd never left. You're back, she said from the doorway. He looked up, and his entire expression transformed, exhaustion giving way to something warm and real. "I'm back. Are you okay?" "I am now." He stood, moving around his desk. "The situation is handled, family business is settled, and I'm very glad to be back where I actually want to be." Lena crossed to him, noting the tension still carried in his shoulders. "What happened?" "Someone thought they could challenge my authority by targeting one of our legitimate businesses. I had to remind them that attacking what's mine has consequences." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. "The situation is resolved." "Violently?" "Diplomatically, though the diplomacy was backed by the promise of violence if necessary." He touched her face gently. "I know this isn't easy for you, loving someone who operates the way I do." "I don't—" Lena started to protest, then stopped. Did she love him? After barely a month, that seemed impossible. But looking at Dominic now, seeing the relief in his eyes that she was here and safe and still willing to stand close to him, maybe it wasn't impossible after all. "You don't have to say it," Dominic said quietly, reading her hesitation accurately. "I'm not asking for words you're not ready to give. I'm just acknowledging what I see." "And what do you see?" "Someone who's choosing to trust me despite every reasonable objection. Someone who's let me into her life even though I come with complications that would send most people running." He pulled her closer. "Someone I'm falling for faster than I have any right to." Lena's breath caught. That's a dangerous admission from someone who values control. Love generally is. He smiled slightly. "I'm learning to be okay with that." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Giovanni poked his head in, clearly trying not to notice how close they were standing. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem with the main gallery electrical. The contractor needs Dominic's approval before proceeding." Dominic sighed, but didn't release Lena. "Give me 5 minutes." "Sure thing, boss." After Giovanni left, Dominic pressed a quick kiss to Lena's forehead. "Welcome to my life. Constant interruptions and problems that need immediate attention." "I've had worse." She stepped back, giving him professional space. "Go handle your electrical crisis. I have dialect documentation to finish anyway. Have dinner with me tonight. My place this time. I'll cook." "You cook?" "My grandmother's training. Remember? I make a very respectable ossobuco now that I'm not trying to impress unimpressed high school girls." His smile turned warmer. "Say yes, Lena. Let me cook for you." She should maintain some distance, especially after 3 days of worrying about where he was and what he was doing. Should probably take time to process her feelings before spending more intimate time together. "What time?" she asked instead. 7. "I'll send you the address." That evening, Lena stood outside Dominic's building, a converted warehouse in Tribeca that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime, and tried to calm her racing pulse. This was different from dinner at restaurants. This was his private space, his personal sanctuary. Being invited inside felt significant in ways she couldn't quite name. The doorman recognized her from Dominic's description and waved her to the elevator. "Penthouse, Mr. Falcone is expecting you." The elevator opened directly into Dominic's loft, and Lena's breath caught. Exposed brick and industrial beams, modern furniture that somehow looked comfortable instead of austere, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that belonged in magazines. But it was the kitchen that captured her attention. Professional-grade appliances, marble countertops, and copper pots hanging from a rack overhead. This wasn't a showpiece kitchen. This was a workspace for someone who actually cooked. "You made it," Dominic said, appearing from what looked like a bedroom wing. He'd changed from his business clothes into jeans and a black t-shirt that showed off the lean muscles she'd only suspected beneath his tailored suits. "Your home is beautiful." "It's functional." He moved to the kitchen and picked up a wine bottle. "I spend most of my time at the center anyway. This is just where I sleep and occasionally cook when I need to think." "What are you cooking tonight?" "Braciole, my grandmother's recipe. Pasta alla norma. Panna cotta for dessert." He poured wine and handed her a glass. "Make yourself comfortable. I have about 20 minutes before everything's ready." Lena wandered the loft while Dominic worked, taking in the details that revealed more about him than any conversation could. Bookshelves full of Italian literature and history, framed photographs of his grandmother in different stages of life, a small altar with candles and rosary beads, the only religious items she'd seen him display. One wall devoted entirely to architectural plans and sketches for the cultural center. "You really do care about this more than anything," she said, studying the detailed notes in the margins of the sketches. "Almost anything." Dominic's voice came from directly behind her. "There's one thing I'm learning to care about more." Lena turned to find him standing close, wine glass abandoned, and attention completely focused on her. "Dominic, I love you." He said it simply, without drama or expectation. "I know it's too soon. I know we have complications and power dynamics and a dozen reasonable objections, but I'm tired of being careful with something this true. I love you, Lena Caruso. What you do with that information is entirely up to you." Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it. "You can't just—" "I can. I just did." He stepped closer, not touching but giving her the option to close the distance or retreat. "You don't have to say it back. I'm not asking you to feel something you don't feel. I just needed you to know where I stand." Lena stared at him, this complicated, dangerous man who'd transformed her life in barely a month, who valued her opinion enough to argue about dialect representation, who installed exhibition cases by hand to honor his grandmother's memory, who'd just admitted loving her without any expectation of reciprocation. "You're insane," she said finally. "Probably." His smile was slight. "Does that change anything?" "Everything. Nothing. I don't know." She set down her wine glass before she dropped it. "I came here thinking we'd have a nice dinner and maybe talk about work. Instead, you're standing there telling me you love me like it's not completely terrifying." "It is terrifying. Love usually is, especially when it's real. How do you know it's real? How do you know this isn't just, I don't know, attraction and proximity and mutual respect for cultural preservation?" Dominic laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Because I've had all those things with other people, and none of them made me want to rearrange my entire life around their comfort. None of them made me question every decision through the lens of, will this harm them? None of them made me want to be better than the blood that made me. That's too much pressure. It's not pressure. It's just truth." He finally touched her, hands gentle on her shoulders. "I love you, Lena. You don't have to love me back. You don't have to do anything except be honest about whether you want to keep exploring this or if I've pushed too hard too fast." Lena closed her eyes, trying to process emotions that threatened to overwhelm her careful control. She'd spent years protecting herself, keeping people at arm's length, refusing to let anyone close enough to hurt her the way her father had when he left. But Dominic wasn't asking for protection. He was offering vulnerability, giving her the power to hurt him, and trusting she wouldn't use it. "I don't know if I love you yet," she said finally, opening her eyes. "But I know I'm falling. I know that scares me more than anything else about this situation. And I know I don't want to stop." "That's enough." Dominic's relief was visible. "That's more than enough." He kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promises that went beyond passion into something that felt permanent. Lena let herself sink into it, let herself stop thinking about complications and consequences and just feel. When they finally broke apart, the timer in the kitchen was beeping insistently. "Dinner," Dominic said, slightly breathless. "You cook dinner. I'll set the table." Lena smoothed her dress, trying to look less thoroughly kissed. "And then we're going to eat like normal people and talk about normal things before one of us says something else terrifying." "Deal." They fell into easy collaboration, Dominic plating food while Lena found dishes and silverware in cabinets organized with almost military precision. The braciole was perfect. Tender beef rolled with breadcrumbs and cheese, swimming in rich tomato sauce. The pasta carried just enough heat to make it interesting without overwhelming the eggplant and ricotta. "Your grandmother taught you well," Lena said after her first bite. "She taught me that food is love made visible, that feeding someone is the most intimate thing you can do that doesn't require removing clothes." His smile turned wicked. "Though I'm open to both approaches if you're interested." "Finish your dinner, Falcone." They ate and talked and laughed, the earlier intensity giving way to something easier. Dominic told stories about learning to cook, about disasters that ended with takeout, and eventual triumphs that made his grandmother proud. Lena shared her own culinary adventures, The time she'd tried to make cannoli for a college boyfriend and ended up with something that resembled crispy pasta tubes filled with cottage cheese. He still ate them, she admitted. Out of politeness or fear, I'm not sure which. Politeness. Fear would have made him run. Dominic cleared their plates. Ready for dessert? The panna cotta was silky and perfect, topped with macerated strawberries that tasted like summer. They ate on the couch in front of those massive windows, the city spread out below them like a promise of possibility. I could get used to this, Lena said quietly. Good. Dominic pulled her against his side. Because I plan on feeding you frequently. They sat in comfortable silence, Lena's head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, watching the city that had brought them together through exhaustion and translation and sharp conversations about wine. Everything that had seemed impossible a month ago, meaningful work, someone who saw her worth, the dangerous possibility of love, all of it felt suddenly, terrifyingly real. Thank you, Lena said finally. For what? For seeing me. For coming back to that restaurant. For offering me this job even though you barely knew me. She tilted her head to look at him. For being honest even when the truth is complicated. Thank you for taking the chance. Dominic pressed a kiss to her temple. For telling me no when I was being presumptuous. For fighting about dialects and wedding traditions. For trusting me enough to be here despite every reasonable objection. We're very good at thanking each other. We're very good at a lot of things. His hand traced lazy circles on her hip. Stay tonight. Dominic, just asleep. I want to fall asleep with you here and wake up with you still in my home. No pressure for anything else, just proximity and honesty and seeing what morning looks like together. Lena knew she should go home, maintain some boundaries between their professional and personal lives. But the truth was, she didn't want to leave. Didn't want to go back to her empty apartment when she could stay here in Dominic's arms, learning what morning looked like, when you let yourself love someone dangerous enough to be real. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting Dominic's loft in shades of gold and amber. Lena woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was, wrapped in expensive sheets that smelled like Dominic's cologne, in a bedroom larger than her entire apartment. He was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so soft it made her chest ache. Creepy, she murmured, voice rough with sleep. Reverent, he corrected. There's a difference. How long have you been staring at me? Not nearly long enough. He brushed hair from her face. Coffee? I make excellent espresso, another skill my grandmother insisted on. Your grandmother was a wise woman. They moved through his morning routine with surprising ease, Lena borrowing one of his shirts while her dress hung in the bathroom, Dominic making espresso and toast like feeding her breakfast was already habit instead of novelty. It felt domestic in a way that should have terrified her, but instead settled warm and right in her bones. I need to go home and change before work, she said reluctantly, checking the time. Or you could keep a few things here, for mornings like this. Dominic said it casually, but Lena heard the weight underneath. No pressure, just offering convenience. That's a big step. It's a drawer and some toiletries. But yes, symbolically, it's significant. He met her eyes directly. I want you in my life, Lena, in all the small mundane ways that add up to something permanent. If you're not ready for that, I understand. But I'm done pretending I want anything less than everything with you. Her heart hammered. They'd known each other barely 6 weeks, and he was already talking about permanence like it was inevitable instead of insane. Okay, she heard herself say. Okay, you'll think about it. Or okay, you'll leave some things here. Okay, I'll leave some things here. On a trial basis, to see if this crazy thing we're doing has any chance of working long term. Dominic's smile could have lit the entire city. That's all I'm asking. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Lena worked at the center during the day, collaborating with Marco on dialect exhibits and occasionally arguing with Dominic about historical accuracy versus accessibility. Most nights she stayed at his loft, gradually accumulating belongings until she had an entire drawer and half the bathroom counter. The center was coming together beautifully, each exhibit more stunning than the last. The wedding traditions display balanced modern Italian-American ceremonies with historical Sicilian context, exactly as Lena had envisioned. The dialects section featured audio recordings of native speakers alongside written explanations, creating a living portrait of language evolution. The cooking classroom was taking shape with copper pots and marble counters that would have made Rosa Falcone weep with pride. But it was the central gallery that took Lena's breath away every time she entered. Dominic had displayed his grandmother's lacework in climate-controlled cases with lighting designed to show every delicate stitch. Beside each piece, Lena had written descriptions in both English and Sicilian dialect, explaining the symbolism and stories woven into the patterns. "This is her legacy," Dominic said one afternoon, standing beside Lena in the gallery. "Everything she was, everything she taught me, it's all here. She'd be so proud of you." "I hope so." His voice went quiet. "Some days I still feel like I'm pretending to be someone worthy of her lessons, instead of actually being that person." Lena took his hand, threading their fingers together. "The fact that you question it means you're not pretending, you're becoming." That construction wrapped up 2 weeks before the scheduled grand opening, leaving time for final touches and staff training. Dominic had hired a full team: educators, docents, event coordinators, all carefully vetted for their genuine passion for Italian cultural preservation rather than just their credentials. "I want people who care," he'd explained during the hiring process. "Credentials can be taught. Caring either exists or it doesn't." The grand opening was set for a Saturday evening in early spring, timed to coincide with the anniversary of Rosa Falcone's arrival in America. Dominic had invited everyone who mattered in New York's Italian-American community, along with cultural critics, potential donors, and city officials whose support could make or break the center's long-term success. "No pressure," Lena joked the week before the opening, reviewing the guest list. "Massive pressure," Dominic corrected. "This either proves I'm serious about legitimate business or confirms I'm just playing at respectability while maintaining my family's less savory operations." "You are serious?" "Anyone who's watched you work knows that. You know that. My team knows that. But the wider world needs convincing." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I'm glad you'll be there with me." "Where else would I be? I helped build this." "As my partner, not just my employee." He said it carefully, like he was testing how the words felt out loud. "I want to introduce you as someone important to me personally, not just professionally." Lena's pulse quickened. Going public with their relationship meant dealing with scrutiny and speculation, with people questioning her motives and his judgment. It meant stepping fully into Dominic's complicated world instead of keeping one foot in the safe professional distance. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? Introduce me however you want. I'm not ashamed of this. Of us. If other people have opinions about it, that's their problem, not ours." Dominic turned her around and kissed her thoroughly, pouring gratitude and relief and love into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know you're not ready to say it back, and that's okay, but I need you to know, tonight, at the opening, in front of everyone who matters, I love you, and I'm not hiding it." Lena's throat tightened with emotion. She'd been dancing around the words for weeks, feeling them settle deeper in her chest with every shared morning and late-night conversation. But fear held her back. Fear of vulnerability, fear of being left again, fear of loving someone whose life came with dangers she couldn't fully understand. "I'm getting there," she whispered. "I promise, I'm getting there." "That's enough." He kissed her forehead. "Take all the time you need." The night of the grand opening arrived with perfect spring weather, warm enough for the outdoor garden reception, cool enough that people wouldn't wilt in their formal attire. Lena spent the afternoon in Dominic's loft getting ready, more nervous than she'd been for her graduate thesis defense. The dress she'd chosen was deep burgundy, elegant without being ostentatious, professional enough for a work event, but beautiful enough to signal this was more than just another evening at the office. She'd left her hair down the way Dominic liked it, and her hands shook slightly applying makeup. "You look stunning." Dominic appeared in the bathroom doorway, already dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting reimagined for modern times. "Absolutely stunning." "I'm terrified." "Of what?" Everything. Screwing up in front of important people. Someone asking me a question I can't answer. Your family deciding I'm not good enough for you. She set down her lipstick carefully. Take your pick. Dominic moved behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. My family doesn't get a vote in who I love. You know this material better than anyone, so you won't screw up. And even if you did somehow mess up spectacularly, I'd still love you, and the center would still be magnificent because of the work you've already done. You're very confident. I'm very certain about you. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. Ready? They arrived at the center an hour before the official opening, giving Lena time to do final checks on the exhibits while Dominic coordinated with the catering staff and event planners. Everything was perfect, lighting calibrated to show each piece to its best advantage, audio systems tested and ready, educational materials displayed prominently without overwhelming the visual experience. Marco found her in the dialect section, making minute adjustments to the audio station positioning. Stop fussing. It's perfect. Could be better. It couldn't be. You've created something extraordinary, Lena. Let yourself enjoy it. She took a breath, forcing herself to step back and actually see what they'd built. The exhibit was beautiful, educational, without being pedantic, accessible without dumbing down the complexity. This was what she'd dreamed of when she'd started her degree. Work that mattered, that preserved culture, and built bridges between generations. We did it, she said quietly. You did it, Marco corrected. Dominic provided the vision and resources, but you made it real. This is your triumph as much as his. Guests started arriving at 6, a steady stream of elegantly dressed people who moved through the center with expressions ranging from polite interest to genuine awe. Lena watched from the sidelines at first, letting Dominic handle the political glad-handing while she observed how people interacted with the exhibits. The cooking classroom drew immediate crowds, people exclaiming over the professional equipment and reading the recipe cards Lena had translated from Rosa's handwritten collection. The wedding traditions exhibit generated animated discussions about family memories and evolving customs. But it was the dialect section that made her heart swell, watching older Italian Americans tear up at hearing their grandparents' specific regional speech patterns, seeing younger generations engage with linguistic history they'd never encountered. You've created something important here, the voice came from behind her, a woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and an appraising expression. I'm Teresa Lombardi, cultural critic for The Times. Dominic mentioned you were instrumental in the dialect work. Lena's nerves kicked into high gear. I helped provide linguistic expertise and historical context. Dominic had the vision. Dominic Falcone is many things, but a linguistics expert isn't one of them. Teresa's smile was knowing. Give yourself credit, dear. This is exceptional work, accessible without being patronizing, educational without being dry. That's rare in cultural preservation. Thank you. Lena tried not to sound as stunned as she felt. That means a lot coming from you. I'll be writing a review for Sunday's paper. I expect it will be quite favorable. Teresa moved closer to one of the audio stations. Tell me about the decision to include Calabrese alongside the more common dialects. They spent 20 minutes discussing linguistic choices and cultural representation, Teresa asking sharp questions that proved she understood the complexity of what Lena had attempted. By the time the conversation ended, Lena felt like she'd passed some crucial test she hadn't known she was taking. Impressive woman, Dominic said, appearing at her elbow once Teresa had moved on. She doesn't give compliments lightly. She asked good questions. She recognized good work. He took Lena's hand, not hiding the gesture even though they were surrounded by guests. Come on, there are people I want you to meet. He introduced her to donors and board members, to city officials and community leaders, always presenting her as integral to the center's development rather than just another employee. Some people looked curious, others speculative, a few downright suspicious about her relationship with Dominic Falcone. But nobody was openly rude, and most seemed genuinely impressed by the work they'd accomplished. The evening was going smoothly until Lena noticed a group of men in expensive suits congregating near the main gallery, men who carried themselves with the same dangerous authority as Dominic, who watched the room with eyes that assessed threats instead of art. Family, she realized with a jolt. These were the Falcones and their associates, the people who represented everything Dominic was trying to move beyond. You okay? Dominic asked quietly, following her gaze. Is that your family? Unfortunately, his jaw tightened. I invited them as a courtesy. Didn't expect most of them to actually show up. An older man separated from the group and approached them, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, with Dominic's dark eyes and a presence that suggested violence was always an option, even if diplomacy came first. Uncle Salvatore, Dominic said evenly. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss seeing what you've built with your grandmother's memory. Salvatore's attention shifted to Lena, assessing her with uncomfortable thoroughness. And who is this? Lena Caruso, my head translator and cultural consultant. Dominic's hand tightened on hers. Lena, my uncle Salvatore Falcone. Caruso. Salvatore tested the name. Sicilian. Through my father's family, yes. Lena forced herself to meet his eyes directly, refusing to show the intimidation she felt. And you're responsible for this dialect work that has the old women crying in the corner? I provided the linguistic framework and historical context. The emotional impact is from the authentic recordings and careful presentation. Salvatore studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Good. Too many people forget where they came from. This center makes sure we remember. He turned to Dominic. Your grandmother would approve. You've honored her properly. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Relief, maybe, or surprise that his uncle had offered genuine praise instead of veiled criticism. Thank you, Uncle. Don't let success make you soft, though. The family business still needs attention, even if you're playing museum curator. Salvatore's smile didn't reach his eyes. We'll talk next week about the Brooklyn situation. He walked away before Dominic could respond, rejoining the group of dangerous men who'd come to see what Rosa Falcone's grandson had built with her legacy. I'm sorry, Dominic said quietly. That was honest, Lena interrupted. He's reminding you that you're not fully free of that world yet. That's reality, not something to apologize for. I'm trying to be free of it. This center is proof that I'm serious about legitimate business. I know. But transformation takes time, and your family isn't going to let you go easily. She squeezed his hand. We'll deal with it together. That's what partners do. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and congratulations. By the time the last guest filtered out around 11, Lena's feet were screaming and her face hurt from smiling. But the center had been a resounding success. Critics impressed, donors enthusiastic, community members moved to tears by seeing their heritage honored with such care. Dominic found her in the main gallery, standing in front of his grandmother's lacework with a glass of champagne she'd barely touched. We did it, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. You did it. This was your vision. Our work, our triumph. He rested his chin on her shoulder. I couldn't have built this without you, Lena. The center would have been adequate without your expertise. You made it extraordinary. She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd walked into her life barely 2 months ago and changed everything. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on me. He smiled slightly. On us, complicated as we are. Lena kissed him, pouring gratitude and affection and the words she still wasn't quite brave enough to say into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Dominic's expression had shifted into something serious. I have something for you. Wait here. He disappeared into his office and returned carrying a small velvet box that made Lena's heart stop. Dominic, it's not what you think. Or maybe it is, depending on how you define these things. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a piece of lace preserved in glass, intricate and beautiful. This is from one of my grandmother's pieces. The one she wore on her wedding day. I had a fragment preserved so I could carry her with me. Lena's throat tightened with emotion. I can't accept this. It's too important, too personal. That's exactly why I'm giving it to you. He lifted the necklace from the box carefully. You've helped me honor her legacy in ways I couldn't have managed alone. You've brought her memory to life through your work, your passion, your understanding of what cultural preservation really means. She would have loved you, Lena, and I think she'd want you to have this. Tears pricked Lena's eyes as Dominic fastened the necklace around her throat, the pendant settling just above her heart. It felt right in a way that transcended logic. This connection to Rosa Falcone, to the woman whose legacy had brought them together. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." "I know you will." He stepped back, looking at her with such love it made her chest ache. "There's something else I need to tell you." "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous, just honest." He took her hands. "I've made the decision to fully separate from my family's less legitimate operations. After tonight, after seeing what we've built here, I can't keep one foot in that world while trying to build something clean in this one." Lena's breath caught. "What does that mean practically?" "It means I'm transferring all questionable business interests to my uncle and cousins. I'm keeping only the legitimate holdings. This center, some real estate, investments that can survive scrutiny. It means I'm walking away from power and money that's been in my family for generations." "That's dangerous. They might not accept." "They'll accept it because I'm making it their problem, not mine. And because I'm offering them territory and resources they've wanted for years in exchange for letting me go cleanly." His expression grew fierce. "I'm done living in shadow, Lena. I'm done pretending I can balance Rosa's legacy with the violence my father and grandfather built. I want a clean life, a life I can share openly with you without wondering if my other world will contaminate this one." The magnitude of what he was offering, what he was sacrificing, stole her breath. "You're doing this for me?" "I'm doing this for us. For the future I want to build that doesn't include looking over my shoulder or making moral compromises." He cupped her face gently. "I'm doing this because you make me want to be the man my grandmother believed I could be instead of the man my blood suggests I should be." Lena's carefully maintained control shattered. All the fear and doubt and self-protection she'd wrapped around her heart crumbled in the face of Dominic's absolute certainty. He was choosing her, choosing them, with a finality that left no room for half measures or careful distance. "I love you," she said, the words tumbling out fierce and sure. "I love you, Dominic Falcone. I've been falling for weeks and I'm tired of being scared of it. I love you." His smile could have powered the entire city. "Say it again." "I love you." In Sicilian, Lena laughed through sudden tears. Ti amo, testa di cazzo." Dominic swept her into his arms, kissing her with the kind of intensity that promised forever instead of just tonight. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying and holding each other like they'd discovered something precious and rare, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me." Lena blinked. "What?" "Marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when you're ready. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life honoring you the way you deserve. Marry me and build this life together. The center, the future, all of it." "That's insane. We've only known each other 2 months. I don't care." He pulled back to meet her eyes. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're it for me, Lena. You're the person I want to wake up next to every morning, the person I want to build something meaningful with, the person who makes me believe I can be more than my father's son." Her heart hammered against her ribs, every logical objection warring with the truth she felt in her bones. This was fast and reckless, and went against every careful plan she'd ever made for her life. "Ask me again," she said finally. "Ask me again in 6 months when you've fully separated from your family business, and we've figured out how to actually live together without killing each other over dialect representation." "That's not a no. That's not a no," she agreed, laughing. "That's a maybe ask me when we're both thinking clearly instead of riding an emotional high from the grand opening." Dominic grinned, looking younger and lighter than she'd ever seen him. "I can work with maybe. Maybe is practically yes when it comes from someone who argues about everything." "I don't argue about everything. You argued with me about the color of the gallery walls last week." "Because cream is not the same as ivory, and the lighting makes a difference." She stopped, seeing his knowing smile. "Okay, fine, I argue about everything. It's part of my charm." "It absolutely is." He kissed her again, gentle this time. "Come on, let's go home." "Your place or mine?" "Our place," he corrected. "You've lived there for the past month anyway. Might as well make it official." 6 months later, Lena stood in the same gallery where Dominic's grandmother's lacework hung in climate-controlled perfection, wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in 3 months of waiting tables. The center had become a cornerstone of New York's Italian-American cultural scene, with school groups touring weekly and the wedding traditions exhibit booked solid for the next year. Teresa Lombardi's review had been glowing, calling the center a triumph of cultural preservation done right, accessible without being patronizing, educational without being dry, a living testament to immigrant resilience and the importance of remembering where we came from. The attention had brought donors and partnerships, grants, and academic recognition. Lena had published 2 papers on dialect preservation that were getting attention in linguistic circles. Dominic had been invited to speak at conferences about ethical cultural tourism and legitimate business transformation. But none of that mattered right now. Right now, all that mattered was Dominic standing at the front of the gallery in a charcoal suit that made him look devastating, surrounded by family and friends and the community they'd built together. "You ready?" Marco asked, offering his arm. He'd agreed to walk her down the makeshift aisle, a friend who'd become family over months of collaborative work. "Absolutely terrified," Lena admitted. "Good. That means it matters." He smiled. He's been pacing for the last 20 minutes. "I've never seen Dominic Falcone nervous before. It's humanizing." They'd kept the ceremony small, 50 people who actually mattered instead of the society wedding Dominic's remaining family connections could have demanded. Former colleagues from Bella Notte, Lena's lawyer friend Sarah, the construction crew who'd built the center, educators who'd helped bring the vision to life. Salvatore Falcone sat in the 3rd row, looking stern but present, his version of acceptance that Dominic had chosen his own path. Lena's mother was there too, looking slightly bewildered by the whole situation, but present in a way she hadn't been since Lena's father left. They were rebuilding that relationship slowly, carefully, without expectations beyond honesty. But it was the front row that made Lena's chest tighten, a framed photograph of Rosa Falcone in her garden, surrounded by flowers that Dominic had flown in from Sicily for the occasion. Making sure his grandmother was present for the moment she'd made possible. Music started. Not traditional wedding marches, but a Sicilian folk song that Lena had found in her research. Something about love that endures across oceans and generations. She walked toward Dominic with Marco at her side, watching his expression transform from nervous anticipation into something that looked like reverence. When they reached the front, Marco placed her hand in Dominic's and stepped back. The officiant, a community elder who'd known Rosa Falcone, began the ceremony in both English and Sicilian, honoring the heritage they'd worked so hard to preserve. "Before we begin the traditional vows," the officiant said, "Dominic has asked to say something." Dominic turned to face Lena fully, still holding her hands. "6 months ago, I asked you to marry me in this room after the grand opening. You told me to ask again when we were thinking clearly. So I'm asking now, in front of everyone who matters, with absolute clarity and certainty, Lena Caruso, will you marry me?" Tears pricked her eyes. Trust Dominic to turn a traditional ceremony into something unexpected. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, testa di cazzo, I'll marry you." Laughter rippled through the gathered guests. Most of them understood enough Sicilian to catch the insult that had become their private endearment. "She called me a dickhead," Dominic announced to anyone who'd missed it. "In front of all of you, and I've never loved her more." The ceremony proceeded traditionally after that, vows exchanged and rings placed with hands that shook slightly from emotion rather than nerves. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, and Dominic kissed her with enough intensity to make several elderly Italian women fan themselves, Lena felt something click into place. This was home. Not a building or a city, but this person who'd walked into her life when she'd been exhausted and invisible and offered her a chance to become visible again. This partnership they'd built through honesty and argument and the shared belief that culture mattered, that preservation meant something, that love was worth the risk of vulnerability. The reception flowed into the garden space behind the center, the same space where Dominic had first told her he loved her months ago. They'd strung lights overhead and brought in tables covered in lace tablecloths, some antique pieces from Rosa's collection that Dominic had carefully preserved, others new work from modern Sicilian artisans the center was partnering with. Food appeared in abundance, Dishes from Rosa's recipe collection that Dominic and Lena had cooked together over months of Sunday afternoons, learning the precise way to roll braciole and the trick to perfect arancini. Each dish carried memory and meaning, tradition transformed into celebration. "Speech!" someone called as dinner wound down. Dominic stood, pulling Lena up with him. Most of you know the official story, how I hired Lena to work at the center, how she transformed my vague vision into something real and meaningful. What you might not know is that she also told me off in Sicilian the first night we met, thinking I didn't understand the language. More laughter, warmth spreading through the gathered crowd. "I heard every word," he continued, his voice gentling, and instead of being offended, I was fascinated. Here was someone who didn't care about my name or my money or my reputation. She cared about authentic wine recommendations and being treated with basic respect. She saw me as a person instead of a position, and that changed everything. He turned to face Lena directly. "You've made me better than I would have been alone. You've helped me honor my grandmother's legacy in ways that matter. You've stood with me through complications and family drama and the messy process of becoming someone worthy of the life we're building. I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." Lena's throat tightened with emotion. "My turn?" "Your turn." She took a breath, addressing their friends and family while holding Dominic's hand. "When I met Dominic, I was exhausted and invisible, working jobs that didn't value me and wondering if my expensive education had been a waste. He offered me work that mattered. More importantly, he offered me partnership. The kind where I could argue about dialect representation and gallery wall colors without fear of being fired for having opinions." She squeezed his hand. "He's taught me that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Someone who respects your expertise enough to implement your suggestions even when they contradict his initial vision. Someone who makes you feel visible without demanding you become smaller to fit their life." Turning to face him fully, she said the words in Sicilian that only he and a few others would fully understand. "Ti amo, Dominic Falcone. Oggi, domani, per sempre." I love you, Dominic Falcone. Today, tomorrow, forever. His answering smile was devastating. "Ti amo Macari, testa di cazzo." "I love you too, dickhead." They kissed to applause and laughter, surrounded by community they'd built and heritage they'd preserved and the promise of a future that honored the past without being bound by it. Later, as evening deepened into night and guests filtered away with full bellies and happy hearts, Lena and Dominic stood alone in the gallery where Rosa's lacework hung in silent testimony to resilience and memory. "She would have loved this," Lena said quietly, touching the pendant around her neck, the fragment of Rosa's wedding lace that Dominic had given her the night of the grand opening. "She would have loved you," he corrected, "for pushing me to be better, for understanding that legacy means something beyond money and power, for helping me build something that actually matters. We built it together. We did." He pulled her close. "And we're going to keep building. The center, our life, all of it, together." Lena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thinking about the unlikely path that had brought them here. From exhausted waitress to valued translator, from sharp conversation to partnership, from careful distance to absolute certainty. She'd told him no that first night when he'd asked her to drink wine with him, had maintained professional boundaries and sensible caution even as attraction pulled her toward dangerous territory, had protected herself with every tool she'd learned from years of being invisible and undervalued, and then she'd taken the risk, had said yes to dinner, yes to honesty, yes to exploring what happened when you let someone see you completely, had chosen vulnerability over safety and found something more valuable than all the careful protection she'd built around her heart. "What are you thinking?" Dominic asked, his voice rumbling through his chest. "That I'm glad I insulted you in Sicilian that first night." His laugh was warm and real. "Best insult I've ever received. And I'm glad you heard it. Best eavesdropping I've ever done." They stood together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the cultural legacy they'd preserved and the personal legacy they were building. Outside, New York continued its endless rhythm, millions of people pursuing their own dreams, their own struggles, their own unlikely love stories. But in this moment, In this gallery dedicated to Rosa Falcone's memory and her grandson's transformation, Lina Caruso and Dominic Falcone had everything that mattered: meaningful work, genuine partnership, and the kind of love that came from seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. From a curse muttered under her breath to a promise spoken in front of everyone who mattered, their story had transformed from impossible to inevitable, from dangerous attraction to permanent partnership. And when Dominic tilted her face up for another kiss, Lina whispered the words that had started it all, now transformed from insult to endearment, from anger to affection, from the end of her old life to the beginning of their shared future. Ti amo, testa di cazzo. His answering smile promised forever. Ti amo, Macari. Sempre. Always.